Gail Catz was born on March 8, 1956, in New York, USA. She was the first child of Manuel, an advertising executive, and Sylvia, who juggled managing the household and working in a hospital's emergency department. When Gail was just 2, her sister Elaine came along, and the two became inseparable. The family lived in Brooklyn until Gail was about 9, and then they moved to Long Island, where her brother Steve was born in 1970. Life in the Catz household was a bit rocky. Manuel had a strong personality and could be pretty tough on everyone, especially during arguments which often ended with days of silence despite sitting together for meals or watching TV. Gail was a star student and graduated from high school in 1973. She then went to the State University of New York in Albany. Despite her smarts, Gail struggled with insecurities and often felt down. Her love life was a roller coaster. She took breakups hard. After nearly 5 years at university, she grew disinterested in her studies, started experimenting with drugs, and even ended up in the hospital after a serious attempt on her life. Her parents were really worried about her and tried to help, but it usually ended in heated arguments. Hoping for a fresh start, her mom suggested she should try to settle down, ideally with a doctor, thinking it would give her a more stable and luxurious life. But Gail wasn't into that idea. Instead, she moved to Manhattan and joined a dance program at New York University. She was talented, but her lack of confidence got in the way, and she eventually dropped out. Not giving up, she then tried social work, but soon felt it wasn't right for her either. Gail returned to Albany and started exploring her artistic side by dating a musician. They experimented with music and choreography, but it wasn't quite the right fit. Then she met Amanda, a band member who played guitar and synthesizer. They clicked instantly, becoming close friends and trusted confidants. At this stage in her life, Gail faced a dilemma. She was torn between following her mother's advice to settle down with a professional partner or continuing to pursue her creative passions. In her search for clarity, Gail turned to a therapist, hoping to find guidance in making these life decisions. Despite the therapy sessions, she found it challenging to set a clear path for her future and defaulted to searching for a partner as a temporary solution to her indecision. By 1979, at 23 years old, Gail was doing odd jobs in Manhattan and spending her leisure time at a popular dance club in Albany. It was there, through Amanda, that she met Robert Birnbaum, a charismatic recent medical school graduate who was a year older than her. The attraction was immediate, and they quickly developed a deep connection. Robert was born on July 22, 1955 in Newark, New Jersey, into a Jewish family. His father was a respected cardiologist, and his mother helped manage his thriving practice. The family lived in a prominent white house in West Orange, a short distance from Newark. Recognized for his intellect from a young age, Robert was the standout student in his science classes. At just 7, he was the youngest participant in an astronomy course at the planetarium in Manhattan, mingling with adults. During his adolescence, he also pursued artistic interests, taking lessons in piano and guitar. Robert attended high school in West Orange, excelling academically and frequently topping the honor roll. He aced his college entrance exams, scoring 800 points, a testament to his intellectual prowess. He enrolled at Albany Medical College and completed the typically 8-year program in just 5 years, thanks to his exceptional memory and self-confidence. Alongside his academic and artistic pursuits, Robert also engaged in judo, mastering various combat techniques, including those used to incapacitate an opponent, which hinted at a complex blend of interests and abilities in his character. Robert was also passionate about flying, and while studying medicine, He completed all the necessary courses to obtain his pilot's license for light aircraft. Furthermore, he dreamt of becoming the first Jewish astronaut. Robert could be described as the complete package. He was handsome, charming, well-educated, cultured, and sensitive. Besides his surgical residency, he was fluent in 5 languages, loved gourmet cooking, and enjoyed judo, skiing, playing guitar, and flying light aircraft. He had a charismatic personality, was extroverted, and spoke fluently. He was every woman's dream Prince Charming. Robert was known as a romantic among his close circle. Often he would invite the women he was courting to join him for short flights in his plane. Most were charmed by his allure and the marvelous experience of seeing everything from above. When Gail met Robert, her mother's advice echoed in her head, and she quickly concluded that he was the right person to start a family with. The couple went on several dates and flew through the clouds during their romantic flights. Robert became a great support for Gail, who came from a background filled with difficulties. His presence improved her self-esteem and made her feel more confident about herself. As time passed, their relationship grew stronger and became more intimate. Eventually, their love led them to formalize their engagement. Their bond was very solid, and their inner circle described it as something magical. Gail's parents were delighted with Robert, seeing him as the ideal husband for their daughter, not only because of his many attributes, but also because of his medical background. They believed a great future awaited them. However, as the saying goes, appearances can be deceiving, and behind his magical and attractive facade, Robert hid a sinister side. He was controlling, possessive, and prone to anger. Some people close to him had witnessed this side of him, which began to gradually show in his relationship with Gail. Initially, the changes in his behavior were almost imperceptible, but one day an incident occurred that revealed what Robert was capable of when overcome with rage. In a fit of jealousy, he attempted to drown Gail's cat in the toilet of their apartment. Fortunately, she arrived in time and managed to save the cat, which was still meowing in fear the next day. Overwhelmed by distress, Gail called her sister and told her what Robert had done. Together, they took the cat with the intention of bringing it to a shelter, as Gail thought it best to give it up for adoption. During this critical time, her sister took the opportunity to advise Gail to end the relationship and keep her pet. However, Gail loved Robert and was convinced that her love could change him, and that together they could be a happy couple. She believed it was just a matter of having patience and persevering. On August 29, 1982, after a brief engagement and just a month after the cat incident, Gail agreed to marry Robert. The young couple vowed eternal love in a beautiful ceremony held in a synagogue. Until the last minute, Elaine persistently asked her sister to distance herself from Robert, but Gail's response was always the same. She felt she had everything under control. Whenever Elaine brought up the subject, Gail insisted she didn't want to ruin the occasion. She reminded her that the wedding invitations had already been sent out and that all the preparations for the celebration were in place. Moreover, Gail often reiterated that she truly loved her fiancé and would do whatever was necessary to help him change. Gail failed to realize that she was normalizing certain behaviors that seemed harmless, but were actually warning signs of danger. For example, instead of choosing her own wedding dress, she wore the gown her mother-in-law had worn at her own wedding. Despite not liking it, she wore it to ingratiate herself with her, with Robert, and with the rest of his family. Unfortunately, contrary to Gail's expectations, her love was not enough to help her husband, and within a few months of marriage, the atmosphere at home had become very oppressive. Arguments became more frequent. The couple began to cross the boundaries of respect and entered into a love-hate relationship. Friends and family became aware of this situation and could see the excessive control Robert exerted over his wife. He decided on the hairstyle she should wear and her clothing. She had to do everything as he wanted. She was essentially subjected to her husband's decisions and had no voice of her own. According to some acquaintances, Gail began to feel uncomfortable in her own home. She spent a lot of time alone because Robert had long work hours at the hospital, but when they were together, problems arose. When he returned home, the doctor wanted to rest and not spend time with his wife. Gail, for her part, was disappointed. The doctor's salary did not allow her to have the lifestyle she thought she would enjoy, nor did she receive the attention she expected. Indeed, financial issues and the status of the couple were factors of conflict. Gail felt a bit more at ease when her in-laws leased a new apartment in a prestigious area of Manhattan, to which they moved in January 1983. Around this time, Robert insisted that his wife return to university. His efforts paid off, and she decided to resume her studies in psychology. For a brief period, the glamorous apartment, as well as the academic focus, helped Gail feel more settled. That was a time when things functioned better for the couple, but unfortunately, the calm did not last long and was soon replaced by intense arguments. Neighbors of the Birnbaums were witnesses to the situation. A person living in the apartment below commented that they did not need to check a calendar to know what day of the week it was because, almost religiously, the couple would have heated arguments every Sunday. On that day, the only day both were home at the same time, the differences between the spouses became more irreconcilable and cohabitation increasingly difficult. They then decided it was time to seek professional help and scheduled an appointment with a couple therapist. The therapist first met with Robert and, at the end of the session, told him he could leave. She then spoke with Gail and advised her to distance herself from her husband because her life was in danger. Despite warnings, Gail didn't take the advice seriously and brushed off the recommendations. After their sessions, the therapist decided to refer Gail and her husband Robert to a psychiatrist named Michael. By November 1983, Michael had met with them multiple times, both individually and together. He even talked to their parents and quickly figured out that Robert could be a real danger to Gail. He strongly suggested that Gail should leave her husband to avoid serious harm or even worse, but again, she didn't buy into what the expert said. She couldn't see Robert as a threat and chose to stay with him. Michael was so sure about his diagnosis and what needed to be done that he wrote up a document. It laid out all he knew about Robert's personality and the risks of staying together. He also included a note in the document to clear himself from any responsibility if anything bad happened to Gail. He tried to get her to sign it, but she wouldn't. Even though she ignored the advice from both doctors, Gail talked about what went on in the therapy sessions with several friends and her sister. They all thought she should listen to the experts and break it off with Robert, but she didn't listen. In the next few months, things between Gail and Robert just drifted along. Robert was busy with long hospital hours. Gail was caught up with her classes and therapy, and their weekends were filled with arguments and money worries. On July 7, 1985, it was Robert's nephew's birthday party in New Jersey. Robert went to his sister's house for the celebration alone, telling everyone that he and Gail had had a fight, which was why she didn't come with him. The party went on as planned. After the party, Robert made a quick stop at the home of Dr. Scott, one of his good friends. Robert explained to Scott that he was distressed because he had tried to reach his wife several times through the apartment line, but she did not answer the calls. He also mentioned the heated argument they had that morning, after which Gail left and had not been seen since. After leaving Scott's house, Robert returned to his apartment. There, he made several calls trying to gather information about Gail, as he found the place completely dark and empty. Among the people he contacted was one of his wife's former professors, to whom he explained the day's events. The academic advised him to report to the police and to ask the building's doorman if he had seen his wife. He then shared the same information with his wife's relatives. On the evening of July 8, 1985, almost a full day after he got home and started calling around about his wife's disappearance, Robert went to the police station. He seemed genuinely worried as he explained the situation. He told the officers that after their argument the previous day, Gail left their apartment at around 11 a.m. She hadn't come back by the time he left for a family event at 5:30 p.m. and was still missing when he returned later that night. He said Gail was dressed casually, possibly heading to Central Park. Since Robert was the last person known to have seen Gail, the detective asked him for every detail he could remember to help find her. Among other things, Robert mentioned that Gail had a history of depression and had once attempted suicide, which made him worried she might have hurt herself again. For the next 2 days, the police conducted an intense search for Gail, knowing the first hours were critical. However, Robert wasn't much help to the authorities. Although they left several messages for him starting on July 8th, it wasn't until the following day that Robert got back to them. During that call, he asked about the investigation's progress and agreed to meet with the detective 3 days later to go over everything about the day Gail disappeared. By then, the police were starting to suspect something was off and began to doubt Robert's story. No one could confirm seeing Gail leave the building on the day she vanished. Besides the police efforts, Gail's friends and acquaintances were also desperately trying to locate her. They actively searched and handed out posters with her description, all wondering where she could be and what might have happened. At the time, Gail's sister Elaine was 27 and was studying hard for her final law school exams. Initially, she tried to stay calm, but as time passed without any word from Gail, anxiety overwhelmed her. It seemed out of character for Gail to just vanish without contacting her or anyone else in the family. Elaine was also worried because Gail had missed important appointments with her patients, which she needed for her psychology degree and her own therapy sessions. As days went by, Elaine became increasingly convinced that Robert had something to do with her sister's disappearance. This suspicion wasn't just based on how he acted after Gail went missing, but also on things Gail had confided about her troubled marriage. Gail's parents sat down with their children and one of the detectives for a crucial meeting. During this session, Elaine shared some disturbing incidents involving her sister and Robert. She described a time when Robert caught Gail smoking on the balcony. Instead of just scolding her, he violently grabbed her by the neck and squeezed until she passed out. Gail reported this 4 days later, but eventually dropped the case, and the police didn't pursue it seriously either. She also recalled a dinner at a restaurant where Robert fed Gail a bite and then unsettlingly tried to feed Elaine in the same way, which she found inappropriate and strange. As Elaine detailed these acts of violence and excessive control, Gail's parents grew increasingly convinced that their son-in-law was responsible for their daughter's disappearance. Furthermore, during a visit to Gail and Robert's Manhattan apartment, the family noticed all of Gail's belongings were still there: her purse with her documents, payment cards, cigarettes, and keys. It seemed impossible that she would leave voluntarily without these essentials. This oversight made it clear to the Catz family that Robert might have forgotten to remove these items. Unbeknownst to them at that moment, the search for the truth behind Gail's disappearance would turn into a relentless challenge filled with intrigue and deceptive half-truths. The family and Gail's close friends made several trips to the couple's apartment, creating distractions to keep Robert occupied while they searched the place for any clues or suspicious items. They even went through the trash bins of the apartment complex, hoping to find something that might lead them to Gail or implicate the doctor. Despite all their searching, Gail's family and friends never found any concrete evidence. Wanting to leave no stone unturned, Wayne, Gail's cousin, decided to reach out to two of her past romantic interests who might know something that could help the case. He first met with a psychologist who had dated Gail during a 6-month break from Robert. This man hadn't heard from Gail in days and shared that she had been thinking seriously about leaving Robert to marry him. He felt that if Gail had chosen to leave with someone, it would likely have been him. Next, Wayne contacted a banker who had been involved with Gail before her time with Ken. He was also in the dark about her current whereabouts, mentioning it had been a long while since he last heard from her. For those who loved Gail, fearing the worst seemed inevitable, but they still clung to hope that she might be found alive. However, as days turned into weeks, that hope dimmed even though their resolve to discover the truth remained strong. They kept a close watch on Robert, believing he might eventually slip up and reveal something or make a mistake that could lead them to the truth. Knowing he was under suspicion, Robert hired a lawyer named Scott to safeguard his interests. Tensions between the Catz and Birnbaum's families grew, leading to virtually no communication between them. Gail's relatives were frustrated with Robert's parents, who had suggested to the police that Gail might have run off with someone else or even taken her own life. The Birnbaums, on the other hand, were upset knowing the Catz suspected Robert was involved in Gail's disappearance. Months after Gail vanished with no significant leads, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office took over the case, assigning a chief investigator named Andy. He decided to explore a new angle, Robert's interest in flying. Upon investigating the flight club where Robert rented planes, Andy discovered that on July 7, 1985, Robert had taken out a plane and altered the logbook to show he was flying not just on that day but also on the following day. This led Andy to hypothesize that Robert might have killed Gail, then flown her body over the Atlantic Ocean to dispose of it. The fact that Robert had never mentioned this flight during police interviews made this theory seem all the more plausible. However, the district attorney's office informed the Catz family that without Gail's body and in the absence of conclusive evidence, they could not press charges against Robert. From that point on, the young doctor continued his life as an innocent person with nothing to fear. In February 1987, a new forensic search was conducted with the goal of gathering criminalistic evidence from the aircraft Robert had rented and the car his father had borrowed the week his wife disappeared. During this investigation, luminol, a chemical substance that detects traces of blood on surfaces, was used. Despite these efforts, the authorities found no evidence that the aircraft or the car had been used to transport the remains of a person. In May 1989, nearly 4 years after Gail vanished, a torso was discovered in the waters off Staten Island. To identify it, forensic experts compared old chest X-rays of Gail with the remains. The technician concluded it was indeed Gail's torso, but noted that, according to the study, the remains had only been in the water for about 2 to 3 months. This raised questions about where Gail had been all those years, suggesting she might have been alive until just before the remains were found. For Gail's family, the discovery was heartbreaking but brought some form of closure. After years of uncertainty, they were finally able to hold a funeral service and create a memorial for their beloved Gail. A few months after the funeral, Gail's mother passed away and was buried next to her daughter. The prolonged tragedy and the endless questions had taken a heavy toll on her. Meanwhile, Robert seemed to move on with his life with little outward grief. He continued to socialize and date, frequently attending events in the Hamptons, where wealthy New York families gathered. Eventually, he started a serious relationship with Sandy Schiff, a criminal lawyer from New York who saw him as hardworking, sweet, gentle, and devoted. Sandy believed Robert was very open with her, having shared everything about Gail's disappearance right from the start. Their relationship, which was free from arguments or fear, lasted about 3 years. In the early 90s, Robert moved to the Bahamas to open his own plastic surgery clinic, marking 5 years since Gail's disappearance. Shortly after relocating, he began dating Stephanie Youngblood, a chiropractor. She described their first year together as wonderful. They shared many interests and trips, including a memorable skiing trip to Argentina. The couple also balanced their medical careers with adventure and fun. Later, Robert joined Flying Doctors, a group that transported medical personnel to provide care, particularly to children in Mexico. As their relationship developed, Stephanie became more curious about Robert's past. Eventually, she discovered he had concealed his previous marriage and Gail's disappearance. Robert explained he preferred not to discuss it and asked her to keep this information confidential, claiming it wasn't public knowledge. Despite his vague explanations and scant details, Stephanie chose to believe what Robert told her and continued the relationship. Despite her initial reluctance, Stephanie soon found herself unable to ignore the glaring issues in her relationship with Robert. His temperament flared up publicly on a couple of occasions, leading to outright attacks on Stephanie. After a particularly alarming incident, she convinced him to see a specialist. It didn't take many sessions before the therapist pointed out Robert's volatile nature and advised Stephanie to keep her distance, citing her safety. Her gut feeling and the professional's advice prompted Stephanie to end the relationship. Meanwhile, the Catz family suffered yet another loss in 1994. It had been 5 years since Gail's burial and her mother's death when Manuel, the family's patriarch, passed away. The only consolation for the family was that both parents had lived to see their daughter laid to rest. The next year, a decade after Gail's disappearance, Robert started a new chapter in Las Vegas with Janet Chalet, an obstetrician and gynecologist. Their relationship moved quickly to an engagement. Around this time, Robert secured a copy of Gail's death certificate in New York. While he had mentioned his missing wife to Janet, he hadn't disclosed the suspicions that surrounded his past. Confronted with the death certificate, Robert shared more details about Gail, which Janet accepted, moving forward with their wedding plans. In 1997, as forensic technology advanced, the district attorney's office decided to re-examine Gail's case, which had been filed away as unsolved. They exhumed the remains for new tests, which shockingly revealed that the remains weren't Gail's. A year after this discovery, Robert and Janet married and relocated to Mayville, North Dakota, where he had accepted a new job. Their joy grew when they welcomed a daughter in 1998. Robert, having always wanted a family, cherished his role as a father. Since becoming a lawyer, Elaine had committed herself to uncovering what happened to her sister. Working closely with Michael, the psychiatrist who had treated Gail, she vowed to keep pursuing the truth. As a lawyer who often represented children in divorce cases, Elaine's professional skills aided her personal quest. She continually monitored Robert, investigated various theories about Gail's fate, and periodically shared her findings through articles in the press, maintaining hope that the truth would eventually emerge. Elaine actively reached out to various media outlets, including radio stations and television networks, understanding the significant impact they could have in keeping her sister's case in the public eye. She also communicated with the residents of the Manhattan building where Gail had lived with Robert, as well as the hospitals where Robert was affiliated, ensuring that the community saw him as a suspect in Gail's disappearance. As the investigation gained momentum, the police revisited several witnesses, some for the second time. A few women who had dated Robert after Gail vanished came forward to revise their earlier statements, offering a more candid perspective that added depth to Robert's profile. One key witness was a woman who had a romantic relationship with Robert starting in September 1985, just months after Gail's disappearance. She moved into the Manhattan apartment and shared with the police her belief that Robert knew how to dispose of a body by dropping it from an airplane, a theory the investigators were already considering. This aligned with the altered flight logs, which Robert had changed to make it look like he flew the day after Gail went missing. The alteration was conspicuous, done in a different color ink. With new evidence, including the altered flight log and testimony from Dr. Michael Stone regarding Robert's psychological profile, prosecutors charged Robert with second-degree murder on December 8, 1999. At the age of 45, the now prominent plastic surgeon appeared in court alongside his lawyer and wife, pleading not guilty. Bail was set at $500,000, which his father paid, allowing him to stay free during the trial. As the trial date approached, it seemed Robert's luck was dwindling. The trial would be overseen by a judge known as the Iron Princess for her empathy towards cases involving female victims. Recognizing the formidable judge, Robert's lawyer suggested bolstering their defense with a more experienced criminal defense attorney. A month before the hearing, the judge ruled that Gail's psychiatrists, who had warned her life was in danger, could not testify due to doctor-patient confidentiality rules. The trial kicked off in early October 2000. During the opening statements, prosecutors argued that the marriage between Robert and Gail had ended tragically in a fit of rage, leading Robert to murder Gail and dispose of her body from an aircraft. They stressed that, while there was no physical evidence like a body or blood traces, the motive was clear and compelling. Throughout the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a day when Gail intended to leave Robert, which, given his controlling nature, was deemed unforgivable by him. In contrast, the defense maintained that the prosecution's story was speculative and aimed merely to explain the disappearance of a woman whose body had never been found. They presented what they believed were logical, exculpatory explanations for Robert's behavior and inconsistencies over the years. Witnesses played crucial roles in shaping the narrative. A defense witness testified he saw Gail with another woman at a bagel shop on the day she vanished. His description of Gail's clothing matched what she wore that day, although not her physical appearance. Prosecutors challenged his credibility, suggesting his testimony was vital for the defense but unreliable. Similarly, a beauty salon owner who regularly styled Gail's hair testified about Gail seeking an apartment to move into alone, hinting at her marital problems. She also mentioned Gail's infidelities, noting Gail was very detailed when discussing her romantic life. The jury also heard about a letter from psychiatrist Michael Stone that detailed allegations of abuse, alongside witness statements about Gail's experiences with her controlling and violent husband. Additionally, the court examined the altered flight log, and the prosecution underscored Robert's inconsistent explanations to various people about Gail's fate, ranging from mental illness claims to alleged involvement in a botched drug deal, or that she had moved to California and was working as a waitress. Though the evidence was circumstantial, the deliberation ended with the jury convicting Robert of second-degree murder after 7 hours. Despite the conviction, Robert continued to proclaim his innocence. A month later, he was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing a somber conclusion to a lengthy and complex case. 15 years after Gail's disappearance, the person responsible had been convicted and was behind bars. Yet the case took a startling turn when, after 20 years in prison, Robert confessed to the crime. It was December 2020, 35 years since Gail had vanished. During a parole board meeting, Robert disclosed that he had ended his wife's life and disposed of her remains over the Atlantic Ocean. He detailed how a heated argument led to uncontrollable shouting, culminating in him strangling Gail to silence her. He then transported her body to a hangar, rented a plane, and dropped her into the ocean, later describing his actions as an immature loss of control. Daniel Bibb, one of the prosecuting attorneys, was stunned by the confession, having thought it unlikely that Robert would ever admit to the crime. Gail's brothers felt a complex mix of emotions. Robert's admission provided a grim confirmation of their suspicions. Though they would never bring Gail back, they felt that she could finally rest in peace, knowing justice had been served. This tragic story underscores how Gail's hopeful belief that love could change her partner ultimately led to her demise.
She sat straight up and got out of bed when she seen me and started screaming, and I tried to get her to be quiet. I had the knife, it was on the bed. It's about that long, and she rolled against it and cut right here, best I could tell. And I'm no medic. It cut this jugular vein right here.
How far across?
Well, right here.
He described where he stabbed. These were just some of the chilling confessions made by the truck driver who had been targeting women while crisscrossing America. Adam was born on August 6, 1964, in Jonesville, a small town in North Carolina, USA. He dropped out of high school early. Adam was a tall, burly man with a thick, rough beard. He was married to Miriam Benj for 5 years. Their relationship was rocky because, according to Miriam, Adam thought women were beneath him and that he could do whatever he wanted with them. He was abusive to Miriam and even to his own mother, whom he insulted and hit. In 1993, the couple divorced. That year, Adam became a truck driver and began traveling along the East Coast. He drove trucks and worked part-time at a chicken processing plant near his home in Jonesville. Years later, he settled down with another woman. They lived in a trailer home with 3 daughters. Adam had never been in serious trouble, but those who knew him described him as dismissive of women and often antisocial, controlling, and always ready to pick a fight. A former co-worker traveled with Adam in his truck for about a month in the late 90s, covering much of the country. His co-worker eventually refused to work with him any longer because of Adam's constant negativity, argumentative nature, and disrespectful attitude towards women. In his truck, Adam carried a DVD of a horror movie called Hunting Humans. The film, about a serial killer who stalked and then knifed his victims, had a huge impact on him. So much so that when he set out on his trucking trips to the northeastern United States in the summer of 2007, the first things he packed were the DVD, 2 large hunting knives, a torch, and a leather mask with holes for the eyes and mouth. In July 2007, Adam left North Carolina and headed east on Interstate 78, with stops planned in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Early on July 13, 2007, Darlene Ewald, a 42-year-old mother of 2, was on the phone in the backyard of her home in the middle-class suburb of West Hanover Township, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. While she spoke, her husband Todd, a carpenter and youth soccer coach, and their children, Nick and Nicole, ages 24 and 21, were asleep inside. It was around 2 a.m., and Darlene was chatting with a family friend about a surprise trip they were planning. That friend had planned a Caribbean cruise but ended up offering their tickets to Todd and Darlene after having to discipline their sons. Darlene was thrilled about the upcoming October adventure. Unbeknownst to her, someone was watching her on the warm night. Suddenly, from the darkness, a figure emerged wielding a long knife. It was Adam. The killer slit the woman's throat and violently stabbed her in the left side of her chest until she died within minutes. All she could scream was, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" On the other end of the phone, her friend heard the sudden change in her voice. Although Darlene no longer responded, the call was still active. He shouted her name, hoping she would answer. Panicked, he rushed upstairs to wake his wife and told her something terrible had happened to Darlene and that he needed to go to her house immediately. Meanwhile, after the murder, Adam calmly returned to his truck, parked at a nearby stop, and drove away, leaving behind the crime scene. Chad and Patty, Darlene's friends, sped to her house. Arriving there, the place was eerily quiet and they headed to the backyard. The kitchen light shone through the sliding glass doors, and they could see Darlene's lifeless body slumped in a chair, her eyes still open and a gaping wound in her throat. Shocked, they immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, Todd was still asleep in his room. An officer yelled at him to show his hands. Todd, groggy and barely understanding what was happening, was blinded by flashlights and confronted with guns pointed at him. Nick experienced a similar rude awakening. Both men were handcuffed and taken to the kitchen. Todd kept asking what was happening and where his wife was, but the police did not answer. Then, he noticed Darlene's purse on the table next to her car keys and cell phone, which made him worry. The detective eventually removed Todd's handcuffs and took him to another room, while another officer spoke with Nick in the kitchen. Todd then received the devastating news. Darlene was dead. He was heartbroken, feeling a pain like never before, as if someone had ripped his heart out. The whole Ewald family was in shock. Meanwhile, Adam continued with his life as if nothing had happened. Later that morning, he picked up a load from a company as scheduled to continue with his work. Hours later, the detectives interrogated Todd at the station. He struggled to explain how he hadn't heard anything. However, the detectives were not satisfied with his testimony and considered him the prime suspect in his wife's death. The next day, they brought him back to the station for further questioning. They asked about sensitive points in their marriage and accused him of killing her over financial troubles based on their reviewed finances. Todd insisted he had a good job and savings and had no reason to murder his wife. The police then suggested that she wanted to separate from him, which led to her death. Todd maintained his innocence and even took a lie detector test, which the police said he failed. Confused and desperate, he then sought a lawyer. The family was left completely devastated by the crime. Since the incident, Nicole, the 21-year-old daughter, refused to go out alone at night. Her brother Nick relived the tragic memory of their mother's death, often lying awake at night. Todd said the murder destroyed his life and wished he could have been there to save her. Darlene was the first, but sadly not the last victim of the so-called highway killer. On the night of July 17, 2007, in Conewago Township, rural York County, Pennsylvania, a woman named Patricia Brooks was sleeping on her couch when Adam burst into her home. The house was close to Interstate 76 and about 25 miles south of where he committed his first murder. Adam stabbed Patricia in the neck and shoulder with a huge knife. She woke up to indescribable pain, immediately covering the wound with her hands and screaming. Adam then fled through the back door he had entered minutes before, allowing Patricia to survive the attack, although she could not make out any features of the man dressed in black who had attacked her. Monica loved her new home, located in Bloomsbury, New Jersey. Everyone there was friendly, and she felt that nothing bad could happen. She felt so secure that she never locked her doors. Monica had great friends with whom she spent hours talking online. She also had other big passions: photography, motorcycles, and rock and roll. Without any ties, she lived life to the fullest, attending concerts and traveling, embracing each day as if it were her last. On the night of July 28, 2007, Monica was sleeping in her bed when, around midnight, Adam parked his truck at a nearby stop. Dressed in black and carrying a knife, he hid in the shadows, silently moving through the picturesque streets in the dead of night, searching for unlocked doors. Finding Monica's front door open, he quietly stepped inside. He moved through the house noiselessly until he reached the bedroom on the first floor. Startled awake, Monica turned on the light, and that's when he attacked her with the knife. He fatally stabbed her in the throat. She bled out and died quickly, but not before struggling against her assailant. Adam stabbed her multiple times in the neck and chest. Monica died alone at the hands of that monster, without time to call for help or escape. She was cornered with nowhere to go. The crime shocked the peaceful community. Initially, detectives focused on people Monica might have been romantically involved with, as it seemed like a crime of passion. However, they found no solid leads. The police had no suspects until they noticed something significant. Monica lived near the truck stop and the interstate. They decided to contact the FBI, which had begun to systematize investigations of similar crimes occurring along interstate highways across the country. The federal agency suspected there might be one or several serial killers, possibly a trucker who used the highways to randomly select his victims, stalk them, kill them, and then escape. Less than 24 hours after Monica's murder, a new chapter of horror unfolded in Chelmsford, a town in Massachusetts. Adam continued his route northward, parking his truck at a rest area. Around 11 p.m. on July 29, 2007, in an apartment complex, a woman spotted a man hiding in the bushes and called the police. By the time the officers arrived, the man had vanished, but a few hours later, security agents received a frantic call through the 911 emergency service. A man was trying to enter the home of a woman located in a mobile home park. She reported that her daughter thought she saw someone staring at their house, so she went outside to check. There, she encountered an individual dressed all in black, wearing a mask, looking like a ninja. The man turned around, followed her, and banged on the door. She was terrified. The police arrived within minutes, but once again, the suspect had vanished. 90 minutes later, around 4:30 a.m., Adam showed up at the home of Kevin and Jeannie McDonough, located about 2 miles from the trailer park and just off the highway. Kevin, a 49-year-old utility line contractor, and his wife, a 47-year-old administrative clerk, lived in a 4-bedroom house in Chelmsford, a town named one of the best places to live in the United States in 2007. Their 2 children, Shay, 15, and Ryan, 19, also lived in the house. Adam tried the back door and found it unlocked. Shay had left it unlocked around midnight because she thought her brother was still out, not knowing that Ryan had stayed at a friend's house that night. So, Adam entered the house without any trouble. The family's dog, a black Labrador mix named Bosco, was outside and never barked, later leading to suspicions that he might have been drugged by the intruder. That warm night, everyone in the town was asleep. Shay had moved to the guest room because it had air conditioning and was right next to her parents' room, making it cooler to sleep. Suddenly, she felt a huge hand covering her mouth and nose. It was Adam, wearing a mask with openings for the eyes and mouth. In his other hand, he held a huge hunting knife. She couldn't breathe and couldn't see well in the dark room. At first, She thought it was her brother who had come home late, but then she heard a stranger's voice threatening to kill her and making some noise. Adam pulled down the sheets that covered her, and that's when she panicked. She, a swimmer with strong legs, began kicking vigorously against the wall adjoining her parents' room. What happened next, in moments of desperation in the quiet Massachusetts neighborhood, was both a complete nightmare and an incredible story of heroism. She's frantic kicks and a muffled groan woke her parents, who thought she was having a nightmare. But when they entered the room, they saw the huge intruder, initially just a large black silhouette to them. Adam, who was 5.9 feet tall and weighed 245 pounds, was confronted by Kevin, who weighed 160 kilograms and was 5.6 feet tall. Kevin lunged at the intruder, grabbing his wrists, throwing him to the ground and pinning him down. He shouted, demanding to know who he was, while Jeannie tried to wrestle the knife away. Suddenly, Adam burst with adrenaline and stood up with Kevin on his back. Kevin held on and wrapped his arm around Adam's neck. Then, both men crashed against a wall. With his back against the wall, Kevin squeezed the criminal's trachea as hard as he could. Meanwhile, Jeannie managed to take the knife away but severely cut both her hands in the process. By then, Shay had run out and was calling 911 on her cell phone. She told the operator that a tall, burly man had entered her room and threatened her life, and that her parents had caught him. Jeannie and Kevin fought hard to defend themselves, struggling for their lives while waiting for the police. Sometimes, people freeze in situations like these, but the McDonoughs undoubtedly summoned incredible strength and managed to subdue Adam, who was much larger than them, even wresting the knife from him. The officers arrived at the house in 4 minutes and saw Adam subdued by the family. Kevin had applied a powerful headlock that immobilized him. One of the officers warned the intruder not to move or he'd shoot him in the head, while Kevin calmly brushed himself off and asked the police to remove that scum from his home. As the police patted him down, they found evidence that alarmed them. A couple of knives, larger military-style household knives, and a belt from which sheaths for the blades hung. They also discovered a flashlight used for strangling, a ninja star, a hood, and a terrifying leather mask with cut-out eyes and mouth. Meanwhile, in Adam's truck, they found what appeared to be trophies or souvenirs from previous victims and several DVDs, including one from the movie Hunting Humans. After the incident, life slowly returned to normal for the family. Shay started seeing a therapist to help manage the terror she sometimes felt, but she still had problems sleeping alone. In fact, their dog Bosco began to sleep by her side every night. Whenever she saw a shadow, Shay would still get up, but she was grateful to be alive and often remembered how her parents fought for her. They didn't consider themselves superheroes, just parents who acted instinctively to protect their daughter. The FBI was handling a database of about 80,000 unresolved violent crimes across the United States. They had started gathering information on serial killings and assaults near major highways. By 2007, they had recorded more than 500 murders with similar characteristics over the past 30 years, but they were concerned there might be more hidden cases. Approximately 200 suspects had been identified, most of them truckers. With their investigations, the FBI had helped state police with baffling crimes that remained unsolved, and also connected cases that were sometimes half a country apart. Often, suspects use distance as a smokescreen to cover their tracks. When they dispose of a body and move 2 or 3 states away, they know it will be difficult to be identified. The first thing the FBI does when it receives a case is to look for specific characteristics they can investigate. For example, if someone is strangled, the search focuses on all strangling cases. After receiving calls from the police in Massachusetts and New Jersey about unresolved stabbing cases, An FBI analyst determined they were very similar and not far from major highways. This prompted them to put officers from both states in contact. Soon they began linking Adam to his other crimes. Investigators learned that the criminal had been in Bloomsbury the night Monica Massaro died, at a truck stop less than a mile from her house. A receipt found in his truck led them to that lead. In August 2007, a New Jersey police investigator decided to go to Massachusetts to question Adam about Monica's murder. For over an hour, the detective conversed amiably with Adam, just trying to gain his trust. Then, he directly asked if Adam had attacked anyone in New Jersey. Adam then asked if there was the death penalty in that state. The detective replied that no one had been executed there for years. Adam smirked and said, "That's why I haven't done anything there. What I've done is what I've done, and I haven't done anything wrong." Then Adam confessed to killing Monica and described the crime in detail.
She sat straight up and got out of bed when she seen me and started screaming, and I tried to get her to be quiet. I had the knife, it was on the bed. It's about that long, and she rolled against it and cut right here, best I could tell. And I'm no medic. It cut this jugular vein right here.
How far across?
Showing no remorse and exhibiting great cruelty. Initially, Adam claimed he was just a struggling trucker trying to make ends meet for his family of 5. He said he had been sidelined by a back injury, which affected his finances and required him to take medication for various ailments, including hallucinations and diabetes. He claimed his original plan was only to steal some money. He tried to justify his actions by saying he had lost everything, including his family. At the same time, he insisted that he respected the law and treated people the way he liked to be treated. He claimed that when he entered Monica's house and found her asleep, he covered her mouth, but she resisted, and in the struggle, she accidentally rolled onto the knife and bled to death. He then claimed he tried to cover up the crime by stabbing her multiple times to make it look like a sexual crime. The detectives found his version of accidental death hard to believe. Adam insisted that he didn't intend to kill her and that he used his knives as intimidation tactics in case he was discovered. He also denied deriving any sexual pleasure from the murders. Almost a month after his arrest in Massachusetts, Adam was charged with Monica's murder. In most of the cases, DNA has become one of the most accurate tools for individual identification, used by thousands of labs. It's employed first for the identification of biological traces of interest in criminal investigations of various crimes, second in the identification of human remains and missing persons, and third for biological research on paternity and other kinship relations. In Adam's case, DNA was also essential in linking him to his crimes. Weeks after the interrogation where he confessed to killing Monica, investigators received the analysis of the knives recovered in Massachusetts. One of them had blood on it. DNA analysis proved it was Monica's, as well as a necklace found among Adam's possessions in his truck. The man had also discarded some gloves as he ran from Patricia's house. Further analysis revealed the gloves had DNA from both Adam and Monica. Forensic scientists found blood samples on it that turned out to be from Darlene and Patricia, the first 2 women he attacked. Legal proceedings against the highway killer then began. In December 2007, Adam was sentenced to 25 to 30 years after pleading guilty to the attempted murder of Shay. He pleaded guilty to 9 of the 10 charges he faced, which included breaking and entering, armed assault in a dwelling, assault with intent to murder, and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. He only denied the charge of attempting to rape a minor. When the judge asked him if he had done all that the McDonough family accused him of, the burly, bearded man, his arms chained to his waist, simply said, "Almost everything." Shay, who was 16 at the time, did not appear in court on the day of the sentencing, but her parents did. Jeannie, her mother, told Adam that one day he would have to answer for his actions, not just in a court of law. Adam's next trial was in October 2008 in New Jersey, where he pleaded guilty to Monica's murder and was sentenced to 50 years. Finally, in June 2010 in Pennsylvania, Adam pleaded guilty to 2 other crimes to avoid the death penalty. He was then sentenced to between 10 and 20 years for the attempted murder of Patricia and received a life sentence for the murder of Darlene. Members of Darlene's family addressed the judge before the sentencing, expressing a mix of sadness and anger. Todd, Darlene's husband, said what happened was the result of a senseless and unnecessary act by a coward. Adam, wearing the orange and white prison uniform, had his hands shackled. He looked different from the man who had been arrested. He had lost a considerable amount of weight and had his hair and beard cut short. He showed no emotion when he received his sentence and declined his right to speak because he had nothing to say, as he pointed out during the trial. Meanwhile, Nick, Darlene's 25-year-old son at the time of the trial, asked the judge to review the investigation and sentence his mother's killer to death. He told reporters outside the courthouse that he wished to see him dead, but the prosecution had decided not to seek the death penalty as such executions are rare in Pennsylvania. Adam Leroy is serving his sentences at a maximum security prison with 2,000 beds. Authorities have speculated whether Adam was involved in other murders, given the extensive routes truckers take, but this has not been proven. Even the criminal himself has refused to comment to the police on this speculation. One such case occurred in the town where Adam lived and relates to the murder of a police officer who was shot 7 times in October 1996, and his body was found in his patrol car after he had pulled over a truck reported as stolen. Although the modus operandi in this case is substantially different from Adam's, a composite sketch of the suspect created with the help of witnesses resembles the highway killer. In 2011, Jeannie McDonough published a book recounting how a normal family ended the criminal crusade of a serial killer. It started as a personal diary with which the woman tried to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions she felt after saving her daughter from the monster Adam, and the guilt and sadness she experienced for the other victims of the man. She then began to learn more about the women who fell victim to the criminal. She attended several trials in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and started exchanging letters with relatives and friends of the victims. All of this is detailed in the book. Over time, Shay moved in with some friends and began working as a nanny, and her parents had to fight against the sense of overprotection towards their daughter. They also installed a powerful home security system. The case of Adam brings us back to motiveless killers. He was perhaps an aggressive man, but with no criminal record, who suddenly at the age of 43 embarked on a 17-day murder spree, committing crimes against 4 women who had no connection to each other or to him. They simply lived in houses near a major road and had the misfortune of leaving their doors unlocked. The highways became the hunting ground for this man, who chose his victims randomly, only focusing on those who could not defend themselves or pose a threat to him. Christopher Wilder lived a life full of excitement and luxury. As a race car driver, he had a flashy lifestyle that included fancy cars and high-end cameras. He easily attracted many young women who were unaware of his dark side. In February 1984, Wilder began a horrifying journey across the country. Over 7 weeks, he harmed and took the lives of at least 8 young women who were hopeful models. This tragic series of events led to him being known as the Beauty Queen Killer. Christopher Wilder was born on March 13, 1945, in Sydney, Australia. He was the oldest of 4 sons to an American father, Coley Chapman Wilder, a naval officer, and an Australian mother, June Wilder. His life began with a dramatic twist. During his birth, he turned in such a way that his neck got tangled in the umbilical cord. He was stuck and began to suffocate, with his heartbeat becoming barely noticeable. Any attempt to pull him out only made the situation worse. At that time, cesarean sections weren't commonly performed. Seeing their efforts failing, the doctors decided to call the hospital priest to administer the last rites. Miraculously, as they prayed for him, his vital signs completely stabilized. This early brush with death left his parents deeply traumatized, leading them to be extremely overprotective. Despite their vigilant care, it wasn't long before another frightening incident occurred. One summer afternoon, while the family was enjoying their pool, 2-year-old Christopher dove into the water right under his Uncle John's watchful eye. He was underwater just long enough to lose consciousness. Fortunately, his father, skilled in emergency response, quickly applied resuscitation techniques. After a few tense minutes, Christopher was revived. The incident led to many health problems for Christopher during his early years, including seizures. This also affected him psychologically, making him feel fragile compared to other kids. From a young age, Christopher's father instilled military discipline in him, with his mother's full blessing. To Christopher, his dad was everything, and his greatest wish was to grow up to be strong like him, leaving behind the frail and sickly image that marked his childhood. Christopher's teenage years were stable. He enjoyed a privileged life, was educated in top schools, and had a family that was always ready to do everything for him. However, this wasn't enough to satisfy him. Puberty increased his desire to be a powerful person. He longed to influence and dominate others, so his behavior became rebellious. In the evenings, he would sneak out of his house with the intention of lurking around. When he spotted girls walking by themselves, he would quietly follow them to their homes and then watch them through the windows as they changed clothes. Satisfying her sexual appetite was her only desire. The proximity of his home to the sea made the beach his favorite place to spend his afternoons. Like any Australian boy, surfing became one of his favorite pastimes, and it made him gain muscle. No longer an insecure boy, the transformation allowed him to become confident and attractive to young girls, but not because he wanted to date them. His intentions were darker. In the summer of 1963, a few months before his 17th birthday, he and his friends were enjoying another afternoon of surfing and beers when they decided to walk the beach in search of girls. They spotted a 13-year-old girl sunbathing. They offered her a few drinks, and Christopher began making advances towards her. She felt uneasy and tried to leave, but he grabbed her arm, led her behind a dune, and abused her while his friends watched without intervening. He left her there and walked away as if nothing had happened. The girl reported the incident, and Christopher, a known figure in the area, was soon arrested. He pleaded guilty, but his parents interceded on his behalf, claiming that he was a bright young man with a promising future that would be ruined in prison. The court took these arguments into consideration and granted him probation with a series of precautionary measures. One of the steps taken was for him to undergo psychiatric treatment involving electroconvulsive therapy. This involved administering short bursts of electric shocks to the brain, with intensities varying from 75 to 470 volts. The purpose was to treat what was described as a damaged mind. In truth, his condition didn't improve. Instead, his disturbing fantasies only grew. Around the same time, Christopher became fixated on a book called The Collector by John Fowles. The story follows a solitary entomologist who collects butterflies and becomes obsessed with a beautiful art student. This chilling narrative appeared to inspire him deeply. The therapist who treated him during this time knew he was fascinated by this book, which he had nearly memorized. For him, it represented the ultimate fantasy of having complete power over another person. On a warm day in January 1965, two 15-year-old girls, Mary Ann Schmidt and Christine Sherrick, went with their younger siblings to Wanda Beach, an ideal spot for surfing. That afternoon, the wind was too strong for a peaceful stroll, so the group decided to take shelter in the dunes. Mary Ann told her younger siblings that she and Christine would go fetch their backpacks from the rocky area at the south end of the beach, and then they'd return to head home together. Hours passed and the girls never showed up. The next morning, their lifeless bodies were discovered in the sand. Christine had been stabbed 14 times, and Mary Ann's throat was deeply slashed. Their undergarments were completely torn, a clear indication of an attempted rape. The brutality of the crime shocked Sydney and became front-page news in both local and international media. Over 7,000 people were investigated, and Christopher was a key suspect since his physical description and psychological profile matched that of the perpetrator. Despite these coincidences, there was no evidence to charge him, and his DNA did not match the sample the police had from the assailant. By early 1967, it seemed like the turmoil in Christopher's life was behind him. While out for a walk in Sydney's Palm Beach, he met Christine Paluk. They connected instantly and quickly became friends. Their bond deepened, blossoming into a romantic relationship. He loved taking her to the best surfing spots and driving around the city together. To fully win her heart, he often asked Christine to also invite her younger sister, who was 15. After a month of dating, Christine began to feel uneasy, especially because he often looked at her younger sister in a peculiar way. Alarm bells rang when what seemed like a latent violent streak became glaringly apparent during a dinner at his parents' house. That day, without any apparent reason, Christopher suddenly became enraged and punched out a dining room window. Despite this disturbing event, their love overcame the turmoil, and the couple got married after a year. From day one, Christopher gave free rein to all his sexual fantasies, and if his wife refused, he would beat her until she agreed. More than sexual intercourse, those intimate encounters were rape. The hell was short. Just a week after the marriage, the wife found underwear and pornographic photos of young girls in her husband's car. She decided to end the relationship and, accompanied by her mother, went to the police and accused him of sexual abuse and physical violence. She also told them of her suspicion that he might be the killer of the teenage girls in Wanda Beach. Once the report was made, the police began their investigation. Christopher knew he was under scrutiny and could be arrested at any moment, but as usual, luck was on his side. There was no solid case against him. However, the warning prompted him to distance himself from the situation, and with his father's help, he immigrated to the United States. By early 1969, he had settled in Boynton Beach, Florida. He adapted easily and found his calling as an electrical contractor and construction engineer. The real estate boom at the time quickly made him a lot of money, and he became even wealthier when he ventured into the real estate business. With his newfound wealth, Christopher bought a luxurious bachelor pad. He had two public passions: photography and competing in amateur car races. He bought several high-end cameras and set up a photo studio in his condominium. This hobby soon became a ploy to seduce beautiful young women. Using his charisma and approachable appearance, he posed as a talent scout for famous magazines, thereby attracting vulnerable victims to fulfill his sexual perversions. Christopher spent considerable time roaming the beaches of South Florida looking for women until one day he was arrested in Pompano Beach for demanding that two girls pose nude for him. The police detained him, but not for long. He only had to pay a hefty fine to be released. 3 years later, while at a shopping mall, he posed as a photographer and convinced a schoolgirl to allow him to take pictures of her for a prominent magazine of the time. Upon arriving at his van, he drugged her and forced her to have sex with him inside the vehicle. The girl fled and filed a complaint with the police. He was arrested again but managed to negotiate the charges, claiming that his mind shut down on weekends. As a result, he was granted probation with a therapy regimen. Despite his ongoing criminal record, Christopher had managed to evade any formal charges until the mid-1980s, when he persuaded a teenager to get into his car for a photo shoot in a rural location. There, he committed a horrific sexual assault. Arrested and taken to court, he quickly pleaded guilty, but manipulated the jury into believing he would seek immediate psychiatric care, resulting in a verdict in his favor. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation with the condition of attending therapy sessions during that period. At this time, Christopher was seeking a genuine and deep relationship. It was then that he met Elizabeth Kenyon, a 19-year-old who had recently been an Orange Bowl princess and a finalist in Miss Florida. Their relationship was brief. He quickly proposed marriage, but she declined, citing the age difference as too significant, though they remained on good terms. It had been more than 10 years since he last saw his parents, and using this as a reason, he persuaded the court to allow him to travel to Australia. Once permission was granted, he returned to Sydney in 1982. It didn't take long for him to resume his previous modus operandi. He took with him his cameras and a bunch of cards with a false name to pose as a model photographer. One afternoon, he was able to trick two girls under the usual pretext and drove them to an isolated area of the beach where he forced them to undress and pose suggestive poses. Seeing the fear in the teenage girls, he put them in his car and drove them to his hotel. While there, he threatened to beat them. He tied them up, abused them for hours, and then released them. But he was arrested and charged with kidnapping and sexual assault. The case went to an initial detention hearing in a local magistrate's court. The accused didn't seem worried about the charges and claimed that it had all been a misunderstanding. His parents paid a substantial amount of $400,000 for his bail, and he was allowed to return to Florida to handle business matters. Christopher promised to return for the hearing scheduled for April 1984. This situation put him at a crossroads. He was unable to control his impulses, was about to be tried in Australia, and was already known in the United States. He couldn't risk being charged again. The only solution he could think of was a dark one: ensure his victims could not live to tell their stories. Back in Florida, he resumed his passion for cars, and on February 26, 1984, he participated in the Miami Grand Prix with his Porsche. There, he approached Rosario Gonzalez, who was working as a product promoter. Rosario shared her aspirations to be a model and her recent participation in Miss Florida. He persuaded her to have a quick meeting in a nearby cafe to arrange a photo shoot for her portfolio. She agreed, and at noon, they were seen leaving the location in his car. Rosario lived with her parents, who knew she was supposed to return home between 5 and 6 p.m. When she was going to be late, she always notified them. For this reason, and because she did not make any contact, her parents quickly filed a missing person report. Witnesses confirmed that the young woman had left the racetrack between noon and 1 p.m. with a Caucasian man around 30 years old. Rosario's car was found parked near a shopping plaza, but there were no traces of her. The Miami Herald published a profile of the suspect. By then, Elizabeth, his former girlfriend, had become a teacher for children with special needs. On March 5th, 1984, in the late afternoon after finishing her workday, she headed to the gym as was her routine. After leaving the building, she exchanged a few words with the security guard and then walked away in her Chrysler. She made a brief stop at her usual gas station and, by chance, ran into Christopher. He wasted no time in asking if she wanted to model for him in a session, and she happily agreed, so they continued their journey together. That night, Elizabeth hadn't returned to her apartment, but her roommate wasn't worried, assuming she was visiting her parents in Pompano Beach, Florida, about 50 miles away. The next day, when Elizabeth didn't show up for work, her family, knowing it was out of character for her to leave without notice, decided to report her missing. Frustrated with the slow pace of the police investigation, her parents hired a private investigator. With his expertise, he quickly linked Elizabeth's case to that of the young woman who disappeared during the Miami Grand Prix. He also recognized similarities between the ex-boyfriend and the suspect described in the press. The detective visited Christopher's residence, but when questioned, Christopher claimed he hadn't spoken to Elizabeth for over a month and had no idea where she could be. As soon as the detective left, Christopher destroyed all his pornographic material. He then packed his belongings, including his cameras, withdrew $50,000 from his bank accounts, started his car, and headed north towards Georgia, resigned to the fact that his capture was imminent. After driving for 2 hours to northern Florida, he stopped at the first shopping center he found on the evening of March 19th. With camera in hand and his fake business cards, he approached a 21-year-old woman named Teresa Ann Ferguson, who was shopping. He offered her a modeling job, and his words swayed her. He led her to his car and opened the trunk to show her the equipment to convince her of the job's legitimacy. However, when she was momentarily distracted, he grabbed her by the hair and forced her into the trunk. He drove to a marshy area in northern Florida. Ensuring they were alone, he opened the trunk, dragged Teresa out, and strangled her. Without hesitation, he placed her body on the marsh's edge to conceal the heinous crime. In his frantic journey, Christopher made his way to Tallahassee, the capital of Florida, about 4 hours away. His first stop was Governor's Square Mall. In his usual manner, he approached college student Linda Grover, complimented her beauty, and filled her head with fantasies of being on the cover of Vogue if she agreed to work with him. Initially, she refused, but eventually his persistence led her to agree to see the cameras in his car. When he opened the trunk, he pulled out a blanket, restrained her with it, and forced her into the car. He fled the scene, crossing into Bainbridge, Georgia. There, he dragged Linda to a cheap motel where he raped her and subjected her to various tortures. After 2 hours of this nightmare, while he slept, Linda managed to sneak to the bathroom and started screaming. He grabbed all her belongings and escaped. Linda was rescued and identified her attacker from photographs shown by the police. Meanwhile, Christopher fled the state. He drove all night, covering a 9-hour journey to Beaumont, Texas, where he took a break in the parking lot of Lamar University. There, he noticed a nursing student named Terry Walden. Despite deploying his usual charm, she flatly rejected him. On March 23rd, he returned to the mall and was again met with rejections, leaving him deeply frustrated and considering leaving empty-handed. However, he then saw Terry again. Thinking she might have changed her mind, he approached and insisted once more, but her response was the same as before. Enraged by her rejection, he followed her unnoticed to the parking lot. As she opened the door of her car, he suddenly appeared and pushed her inside. Driven by his anger, he took her to a secluded spot where he stabbed her 43 times in the chest, then dumped her body in a nearby canal. He fled in her car. During the search for the nursing student, Texas authorities found Christopher's car abandoned in the mall parking lot. There, they discovered hair samples belonging to Teresa, confirming his responsibility for her death on Merritt Island. By March 25th, Christopher was in Oklahoma, hunting for another victim at the local Penn Square Mall. There, he met a 21-year-old woman who dreamed of becoming a model. His tactic worked better than ever. It was not difficult to convince her to come to his car under the pretense of conducting a photo session for $100. He drove 180 miles north to Newton, Kansas, checked into room 30 of a motel, and abused her until dawn. After breakfast, with absolute coldness, he drove his victim 90 miles northeast of Newton near Junction City, Kansas, where he stabbed her to death and dumped her body near Milford Reservoir. By March 29th, Christopher was in Colorado, continuing his spree. This time, he was at Grand Junction. He started looking for a specific type, a girl with a cowgirl look. He found his target in 19-year-old Cheryl Lynn Bonaventura. Well-dressed and polite, he introduced himself as a modeling agent, and she was thrilled with the proposal, as it was her dream. Naively, she voluntarily got into his car, agreeing to the plan to leave the city. Along the way, they stopped at a restaurant in Silverton where, in front of the staff, they pretended to be a married couple heading to Las Vegas. They arrived the next morning at the Four Corners Monument, where the states of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. They took a photo at the iconic spot and continued their journey to Page, Arizona, near the Utah border. There, Christopher booked a room under the same pretense of being a married couple. On March 31st, Cheryl's family reported her missing to the police, though they hoped it was just a misunderstanding or an act of rebellion due to her age. Unfortunately, that morning, Cheryl and Christopher's journey took them to the Kanab River in Utah, a remote area with deserts, mountains, and cliffs. As they silently admired the scenery, Christopher unexpectedly stabbed his victim and then shot her, leaving her lifeless. He abandoned her body in a desert area. Christopher's journey continued to Las Vegas, Nevada. His plan was to attend a modeling event, which for him was a paradise filled with naive girls eager to succeed in the tough world of flashes and glamour. Camera in hand, he arrived and sat in the front row to scout his potential victims. At the end of the day, after talking with several teenagers, he focused his attention on 17-year-old Michelle Lynn Korfman. She had driven over 25 miles from her home in Boulder City, Nevada. Nervous about participating in her first casting, she had asked her family and friends to let her go alone. They talked, and Christopher filled her with compliments. Subsequently, Michelle changed her clothes and left the mall in his company. It was April 1st. As soon as Las Vegas authorities alerted the FBI about the disappearance of the young woman at the modeling event, the agents reacted swiftly, requesting all photographs taken during the evening. A photographer promptly handed over 5 rolls of film. After developing them, they could see Michelle walking the runway, with Christopher intently focusing on her. Meanwhile, like the others before her, Michelle suffered violence and torture at his hands. Her body was left at a rest stop in Southern California. On April 4th, Christopher reached the opposite coast of the United States, in Torrance, California. There, he went to a shopping mall, where he saw a girl filling out a job application. She was Tina Marie Risico, 16 years old. He offered her the usual plan and the same $100, much more than she would earn as a store employee. The young girl was hesitant but excused herself, saying she needed to get home. Her rejection did not sit well with him. He pointed a gun at her and demanded she get into his car without making any noise. Frightened, she complied, and then sat in silence for 2 hours while he drove to San Diego. Once in the city, Christopher rented a room and unleashed his usual barrage of abuses against the girl. During a break, he turned on the TV and was shocked to see a special bulletin announcing him as a new addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, specifically linking him to the disappearance and murder of several young women. He was dubbed the Beauty Queen Killer. In a turn of events, he chose not to kill Tina, but instead coerced her into becoming his accomplice to lure more victims. In exchange for her cooperation, he promised to release her in the next city. Terrified, she agreed. He started driving back east and arrived in Merrillville, Indiana on April 10th. There, Tina kept her word. At the South Lake Mall, she convinced 16-year-old Dawnette Sue Wilt to join them, assuring the young girl that another woman's presence meant safety. In the parking lot, Christopher pulled out a gun and forced Dawnette into the car. Once at a nearby hotel, Tina witnessed him attacking Dawnette for 2 consecutive days. Christopher kept the TV on and saw another FBI bulletin, this time Tina's mother pleading for her daughter's life. Panicked, he ordered the girls to grab their belongings and get into the car immediately. He then drove nonstop to the border of New York. Considering it too risky to travel with both, he left his car in a wooded area of Penyon. While Tina stayed in the car under threat of death if she left, he took Dawnette into the small forest. Suddenly, he began to strangle her. She fought back fiercely, but he pulled out a knife and stabbed her twice in the chest. Thinking her dead, he walked away. Fortunately, Dawnette was still alive. With great effort, she managed to drag herself to the side of the road. A truck driver took her to the hospital in Penyon, where they managed to save her life. Hours later, she was able to report what had happened to the county sheriff. She detailed her attacker and the young woman accompanying him. She described the vehicle they were traveling in and their intended escape destination, Canada. This triggered a police operation to capture the fugitive. Christopher drove to Victor, New York, just 50 minutes from where he had abandoned Dawnette. He parked at the Eastview Mall, exited the car violently with a gun in hand, and kidnapped Beth Elaine Dodge, a 33-year-old woman who was passing time while waiting for her daughter to come out of daycare. He forced her into his vehicle and commanded Tina to drive Beth's car. After a short drive to the outskirts of the city, he stopped next to an abandoned gravel quarry. He pointed the gun at Beth, led her to a densely wooded area, and shot her in the back. Then he made Tina transfer all belongings from the other car to the stolen one. In his way, Christopher reassured Tina that he would not harm her and chose to drive to Logan Airport in Boston. There, he bought her a ticket back to California and set her free. While in Boston, he headed north to Beverly, Massachusetts, attempting to kidnap 19-year-old Carol, who he assaulted suddenly on the street. However, he was unsuccessful as she managed to escape screaming for help. Descriptions of both the vehicle and the suspect were circulated among patrol officers, making it only a matter of hours before the serial killer would be caught. On the afternoon of April 13th, needing directions to Canada, he stopped at a gas station in Colebrook, New Hampshire. However, 2 state troopers recognized him and approached. At that moment, Christopher reached for the gun in the car, threatened the officers, and a struggle ensued with one of them. Suddenly, the revolver went off twice. One bullet seriously injured the officer, while the other struck the killer directly in the heart. Christopher died instantly. Throughout his spree across the United States, he kidnapped, tortured, raped, and murdered 8 young women, but it is believed there were more victims. Christopher Wilder was cremated in Florida, leaving behind a personal fortune of over $7 million. In June 1986, a court-appointed arbitrator ruled that this money should be divided among the families of his victims. There were numerous missed opportunities to stop Christopher's spree of violence, which escalated into serial killings. However, his parents helped him evade punishment. Jurors were swayed by his false promises of seeking psychiatric help, and the victims were left at the mercy of his twisted mind and horrific fantasies. For those who knew them, Jordan Graham and Cody Johnson appeared to have a perfect relationship, especially after their picturesque wedding on June 29, 2013. However, shortly after the celebration, Jordan's demeanor began to change dramatically. Friends noticed she became increasingly distressed, a shift that a close acquaintance attributed to her fear of consummating the marriage. Just a week and a day following their nuptials, Jordan and Cody went for a hike along a cliff in Glacier National Park, not far from Jordan's hometown of Kalispell, Montana. Jordan returned from the hike alone, and the next day, Cody was reported missing. Initially, Jordan told friends and authorities that Cody had gone out with friends, leaving many questions unanswered. As the days passed and the investigation deepened, the weight of the evidence began to reveal the stark reality of the situation. Cody Johnson was born on a sunny day, April 8, 1989, in the bustling city of San Jose, California. He had a close bond with his mother, Sherry Johnson, which defined much of his early life. In 2002, they packed up and moved to Kalispell, a charming little tourist spot nestled in the scenic Flathead Valley of northwestern Montana. This town lies cozily between a shimmering lake, also named Flathead, and the majestic peaks of Glacier National Park. Cody was a true adventurer at heart, spending his days exploring the wild, vast outdoors, sometimes cruising down long, winding trails with his buddies. It was during these youthful escapades that he kindled a deep, enduring passion for cars, a hobby that soon turned into much more. Those who knew Cody described him as the real deal, charismatic, warm-hearted, and always ready to lend a hand. He was the kind of friend who didn't think twice about going out of his way for someone he cared about. As he grew older, Cody turned his childhood car obsession into a flourishing career. He started small, tweaking and enhancing cars for racing during his teen years. Over time, this hobby evolved into a full-blown business dealing with commercial vehicles. Aside from his automotive pursuits, Cody also worked at Nomad Communications, where he teamed up with his uncle and a crew of car enthusiast friends. It was a bonus that his childhood best friend, Cameron Fredrickson, was also his boss, making work feel a lot like hanging out with friends. Life was almost perfect for Cody. The only thing he felt he was missing was someone special to share it with. At the age of 23, he was ready to settle down. He often talked about finding a church girl to marry, and then on Halloween 2011, he met Jordan Lynn Graham. Jordan was born in August 1991 and had spent her entire life in Kalispell. Raised in a deeply religious family, her life revolved around her faith. She was a regular at Faith Baptist Church, where she helped care for children and supported local families. Jordan dreamed of one day being a stay-at-home mom, raising a family in the faith that meant so much to her. When Jordan and Cody met, there was an instant connection, although Jordan was quite shy initially. As they chatted, she shared her dreams of family life and her love for the outdoors. Cody was smitten. Jordan found him intriguing too, but at 20 she wasn't quite ready to jump into a serious relationship. They went on a few dates and decided to remain friends for now. Everything took a new turn when Cody decided to win Jordan's heart for good. He started by joining her church, First Baptist, and began mingling in the same social circles she did. This marked the beginning of a transformation from their casual friendship to a more serious relationship, at least from Cody's perspective. By November 2011, they were officially a couple, and Cody was completely smitten with Jordan. He was so in love that he wanted to spend every possible moment with her. His mother, Sherry, remarked that just a few weeks into their dating, Cody was already sure he wanted to marry Jordan, even after she expressed her wish to remain chaste until marriage. His feelings remained unchanged. However, those who knew them both could sense that Jordan's feelings weren't as intense as Cody's. Some thought her reserved nature might be the reason, but others suspected the relationship was somewhat unbalanced. They rarely showed affection in public, like holding hands or flirting, which raised eyebrows among their friends. Despite the doubts, Jordan accepted Cody's marriage proposal in December 2012, which surprised many of her friends who felt she wasn't quite ready for marriage. Yet, they were happy for her when she excitedly announced her engagement on Instagram, calling it the best early Christmas present ever. The wedding was set for June 29, 2013, and planning began in earnest with both Cody and Jordan's best friend Kimberly playing significant roles. Jordan, in particular, threw herself into the preparations and even performed a song at the wedding, written by a professional songwriter. The lyrics of the song would later seem eerily foreboding. As the wedding day approached, Jordan's apprehensions grew. She repeatedly questioned her decision to marry Cody, confiding in Kimberly whether she was making the right choice. On the day of the wedding, her anxiety was palpable. She seemed reluctant to make eye contact with Cody. Her gaze often directed downward, revealing the turmoil she felt about the step they were about to take. After the wedding ceremony, Jordan managed to put on a brave face for the wedding photos and even seemed genuinely present during their first dance. It looked like she was finally warming up to the moment, focusing all her attention on Cody. But this apparent happiness was short-lived. The very next day, from their honeymoon hotel, Jordan sent a distressed text to her friend. She confessed that she had not consummated the marriage and had rebuffed Cody each night. She expressed dread over the expectations of intimacy, texting, "I just know he's going to want to do stuff, and I'm not really wanting to." In another message, she hinted at using excuses about her period to avoid intimacy, fearing the consequences if forced into a situation she was uncomfortable with. Jordan's deep-rooted fear of intimacy stemmed partly from her religious beliefs and partly from her unresolved feelings towards Cody. She was terrified at the thought of being physically close to him. The tension in their relationship escalated until July 7th, a week after their wedding. Although Cody was supposed to spend the day golfing with friends, he canceled to spend time with Jordan, which included church and some quiet time by the lake. Later, they joined friends for dinner at a local Dairy Queen. That evening, after returning home with Jordan, Cody vanished. His absence was first noticed the next day by his close friend and co-worker Cameron, who found it unusual for Cody, a punctual and dependable employee, to not show up for work. Concerned, Cameron went to the new house Cody had recently purchased with Jordan. After repeatedly knocking with no response, he let himself in, but found the house empty and unsettlingly quiet. His concern turned to alarm when he discovered Cody's phone in the garage, an unusual oversight for someone who always carried it with him. This was a clear red flag for Cameron, indicating that something serious might have happened. Cameron's frantic calls to friends and family confirmed that no one had seen Cody since the dinner at Dairy Queen around 8:30 p.m. the previous night. The mystery of Cody's whereabouts deepened, and the worry among his friends and family grew. Cameron rushed to the police station to report Cody missing, and the seriousness of his concern prompted the authorities to act immediately. One of the first police officers to interview Cameron found it odd that Cody's boss reported him missing, not his wife, Jordan. Later that day, Kimberly, a close friend of the couple, managed to reach Jordan to ask about Cody's disappearance. Jordan explained that after they had left the restaurant, Cody received a phone call that seemed to upset him. She said she gave him space to cool off. Later, when she went to the garage to fetch her phone charger from their car, she saw him leaving with some friends in a black car. She recounted receiving a text from Cody saying he was going out for a ride with some visiting friends. When questioned by the police, Jordan reiterated her story and added that she didn't recognize the men with Cody. She insisted they hadn't argued that night and suggested Cody was likely out having fun with his friends. She defended her decision not to report him missing immediately, explaining she didn't want to cause unnecessary alarm if he was just out for a few hours. However, 48 hours after Cody's disappearance, tension rose during a gathering at the family home. Friends and family were baffled by Cody's uncharacteristic behavior, disappearing without telling anyone where he was going, particularly so soon after his wedding. Despite the growing doubts, Jordan maintained her story. The atmosphere grew more strained, and during an intense discussion, Jordan became so agitated that she threw her wedding ring across the room. While some saw this as a strange way to cope, Kimberly sensed something more troubling. Kimberly called her friend to discuss her suspicions after leaving the gathering. The next day, the police called Jordan in for further questioning due to the inconsistencies in her accounts. The situation intensified as they tried to piece together Cody's whereabouts and understand the events leading up to his mysterious disappearance. The investigation into Cody's disappearance intensified when the detective confronted Jordan about inconsistencies in her story. The detective had spoken to several people and stressed the importance of Jordan being truthful, hinting that there was likely more to her story than she was admitting. Meanwhile, Cody's mother brought the police his phone records from the day he vanished, hoping they might reveal something about his last known activities. One of the calls was to a friend about returning a borrowed tool, but this lead quickly fizzled out. The friend had an alibi. His wife was in labor at the time of Cody's disappearance, clearing him of any suspicion. With no new leads and their options running thin, the police's focus returned to Jordan, whose account was becoming increasingly dubious. On July 10th, Graham reported to police that she had received a suspicious email from an account named Carmantony 607, confirming her husband's death. The email read, "My name is Tony. There is no bother looking for Cody anymore. He is gone. I saw your post on Twitter and thought I would email you. He had come with some buddies and met up with me on Sunday night in Columbia Falls. He was saying he needed to be with his buddies for a bit and take them for a joyride. 3 of the guys came back saying that they had gone for a ride in the woods somewhere, and Cody got out of the car and went for a little hike, and they are positive he fell and he is dead, Jordan. I don't know who the guys were, but they took off, so call off the missing persons report. Cody is gone for sure. Tony." Jordan showed this message to one of her friends, displaying no emotion as she explained that according to the email, Cody had accidentally fallen off a cliff in Glacier National Park while with friends. The friend, who was horrified by the message and the lack of reaction from Jordan, urged her to take the email to the police immediately. She was shaken, frantically pushing Jordan to act, exasperated by her passive demeanor. Despite Jordan eventually going to the police with the email, it didn't provide the closure they hoped for. Instead, the mysterious message only deepened the investigators' suspicions, driving them to probe even further into the puzzling circumstances surrounding Cody's disappearance. One of the detectives found the timing and content of the email too convenient, but what troubled him even more was Jordan's unemotional reaction to the news of her husband's presumed death. Despite the dubious email, Jordan organized a trip to Glacier National Park with her friends and family to look for Cody. Hannah, one of the friends on the trip, noted Jordan's oddly cheerful demeanor during the drive, describing her as carefree, even sticking her hand out of the window as they drove. Their initial search yielded no results, but on the second day, Jordan insisted on leading the group to a specific overlook despite alternative suggestions. She claimed to have a strong feeling about this particular location. Once there, they parked at the top of a loop trail known for its steep ascent to a 200-foot cliff that towers over a deep ravine. With a sureness that seemed rehearsed, Jordan quickly made her way to the edge of the cliff, peering intently into the ravine below. She casually tossed a rock down and speculated, "I think he's down there." Her emotionless demeanor at such a dramatic moment raised eyebrows. It required the daring efforts of an FBI agent who secured himself to a tree to lean over the precipice, along with the assistance of multiple emergency service teams and a helicopter to finally locate and retrieve a body at the bottom of the ravine. The body was identified as Cody Johnson, a beloved local businessman and car enthusiast. The idea that Cody could have accidentally ventured into such a dangerous area seemed implausible. The coroner later confirmed that the injuries sustained were consistent with a fall, noting significant damage to Cody's head and arms. While Cody's friends and family were overwhelmed with grief, Jordan appeared to be relieved by the discovery. This only fueled suspicions, as now the police's investigation might be curtailed with the recovery of the body. However, the identity of the person behind the email remained a mystery. Jordan suggested the police look into Tony, a car enthusiast and friend of Cody, who hadn't seen him in months. Tony, concerned for Cody, allowed the police full access to his accounts, but they found no trace of the email address in question. With no further leads from Jordan and Cody's phone records, the police decided to investigate the IP address associated with the email. As they awaited this crucial information, the police deepened their inquiries among Cody's social circle. It was during these discussions that Kimberly revealed insights into Jordan's state of mind before the wedding. She recounted how Jordan had repeatedly questioned her decision to marry Cody, expressing dread about the physical aspects of marriage and regretting her decision entirely. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the ongoing investigation, highlighting potential motives and state of mind that could be crucial in unraveling the truth behind Cody's tragic fate. Just 2 days before Cody vanished, Jordan expressed her unhappiness in a message to her friend Kim, saying, "I should be happy, but I'm not. If I tell him, it's going to break his heart." She also disclosed a troubling incident where Cody had physically intimidated her, which added to her distress. On July 7th, further messages revealed that Jordan was apprehensive about discussing her feelings with Cody, fearing his reaction. After their conversation that day, which escalated into a heated argument, Jordan left home to give Cody time to cool off. This decision marked a significant turning point. The police's suspicion towards Jordan intensified when they learned about these events. Soon after, the information from the email, which had misleadingly declared Cody dead, was sent from a computer at Jordan's stepfather's house. Interviews with her family suggested Jordan could be behind this email, although this alone wasn't conclusive proof. The breakthrough came when the investigation revealed that both Cody and Jordan's cell phones had pinged towers near Glacier National Park on the night Cody was last seen, despite Jordan's claims that she wasn't with him. Surveillance footage also confirmed their presence together at the park entrance at 9:17 p.m., further contradicting her statements. Faced with mounting evidence, police brought Jordan in for questioning again on July 18, 2013. Confronted with the evidence, Jordan broke down and recounted the events of July 8th. She admitted that after confessing her true feelings about their marriage, they had argued fiercely. In a moment of high tension and emotional turmoil, they went to Glacier National Park, where, according to Jordan, during an argument near a cliff, she pushed Cody, resulting in his fatal fall. She explained her actions by saying the emotional pressure and anger in that moment overwhelmed her, leading to the tragic outcome. Jordan's emotional turmoil was evident in her statement to the police, describing how she felt overwhelmed by every emotion imaginable in that tragic moment. Detectives tried to piece together the scattered details of her confession, including a mysterious scarf found at the scene, which she mentioned in an offhand comment about a blindfold. Jordan insisted that Cody's death was an accident, vehemently denying any premeditation or intent to harm him. She explained that in a moment of intense emotion and panic, she pushed Cody from the cliff when he turned his back to her, facing the precipice. Further complicating her story, Jordan admitted to creating the email at her stepfather's house and using it to send misleading messages about Cody's fate. Despite her confession, Jordan walked out of the police station without immediate charges, a decision that puzzled many. It wasn't until July 22nd at Cody's funeral that public perception shifted dramatically against her. Jordan was seen texting during the service, an act viewed by attendees as a profound disrespect during such a solemn occasion. This behavior fueled rumors that she had engineered Cody's death as a desperate escape from an unhappy marriage, avoiding the stigma of divorce in her community. The community's whispers about her motives and the lack of grief displayed at the funeral led to a growing belief that Jordan might never have truly loved Cody. Subsequently, she was charged with first- and second-degree murder along with making false statements. The severity of the situation escalated when the jury, considering the evidence in her actions, added a charge of premeditated first-degree murder. Jordan's trial commenced on December 9, 2013, with the prosecution aggressively pursuing the case against her. As the trial unfolded, the evidence stacked up, and Jordan's prospects looked increasingly grim, painting a bleak picture of her future. During the trial, prosecutors meticulously dissected Jordan's narrative, challenging her credibility by highlighting her inconsistencies and questioning her claim of innocence and remorse. The testimonies from Cody's family and friends were particularly damaging. They depicted Jordan as distant and indifferent, suggesting she killed Cody to avoid intimacy with him. Her defense team initially attempted to argue self-defense, but seeing the challenging odds, Jordan opted for a plea deal. She agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 30-year sentence without parole, avoiding a first-degree murder charge that could lead to harsher penalties. However, upon learning that the prosecution still intended to pursue a charge of premeditated first-degree murder, which could extend her sentence to 50 years, Jordan attempted to retract her plea. This decision fell to a district judge who had to determine whether to accept her retraction or proceed with sentencing under the agreed plea. On December 13, 2013, Jordan Lynn Graham was sentenced to 30 years and 5 months in prison, with an additional fine of over $16,000 in restitution to Cody's family. During her sentencing hearing, Jordan took the stand to apologize, explaining that her actions were a result of shock and panic, claiming she hadn't been fully aware of their precarious location when she pushed Cody. Over the following years, Jordan made several attempts to have her sentence reduced, appealing on various grounds, but none of her appeals led to a case review or reopening. The federal prosecutors were firm in their intent to use her case as a stern warning about the severe consequences of committing a crime under federal jurisdiction. Ultimately, Jordan's sentence meant she would not be eligible for release until she was over 52 years old, firmly underscoring the gravity of her actions and the justice system's commitment to upholding severe penalties for serious crimes. Sylvia Venceslavova, known as Sylvie, was a Bulgarian webcam model who had unwittingly become the most significant figure in Grant's life. He encountered Sylvie on Cam Girls, a live-streaming adult website. Grant was captivated by her performances, spending many hours each night watching her. It cost him 90 tokens per minute to view her sessions, and he regularly purchased 5,000 tokens at a cost of $600. Grant quickly began lavishing gifts on Sylvie, sending her clothes and sex toys, treating her as if she were his girlfriend. While Sylvie did not reciprocate his romantic feelings, she did acknowledge his financial generosity. Unbeknownst to Sylvie, however, the funds were not Grant's own. He had been covertly siphoning money from his father and brother. In a mere 3 months, Grant had squandered $200,000 of his family's money on his fixation with Sylvie. Concerned by his spiraling behavior, his family imposed rules to curb his actions, but the consequences of his irrational obsession would soon escalate to unimaginable levels. Margaret Ann and Chad Robert Amato got married in the mid-1980s. Margaret, who was 2 years older than Chad, already had a 3-year-old son named Jason from her previous marriage. Chad didn't mind that Margaret had a son and was eager to treat Jason as his own. In 1988, they had their first child together, a son named Cody, and a year later, on May 20th, 1989, they welcomed another son, Grant. The three brothers grew up very close to each other. They rarely heard no as an answer, but knew they had to follow strict family rules, do well in school, help out at home, and behave well to earn privileges. They worked hard to make their parents proud and to be a strong support for them. Both Margaret and Chad had advanced degrees in healthcare. Margaret worked as a senior operational manager at a top private clinic, and Chad, who started as a clinical pharmacist, later moved into software specialization. The family was well off, living in a large house in the suburbs with a stable where they bred racehorses as a hobby. After high school, Jason moved out to attend college and eventually started his own family in another state. He stayed close to his parents and brothers despite the distance. Cody and Grant were especially close, doing many activities together like attending the same school, playing on the same sports teams, and going to the shooting range with their dad on weekends. Their father owned a notable collection of firearms, which he kept secure. Grant, being the youngest, often got extra attention and care, especially since he was a frail and sickly child. He grew up shy and reserved, finding it difficult to make friends outside his family. His brothers were his closest companions, particularly Cody after Jason moved away. Both Cody and Grant attended the University of Central Florida, where they attended nursing school together and then proceeded to pursue further studies to become nurse anesthetists. Cody was at the top of his class, while Grant struggled and barely passed. However, they both secured jobs in their field. Cody was known as a dependable professional, but Grant often made mistakes at work and needed his tasks double-checked. In the summer of 2018, Grant's career faced a major setback when he was caught stealing powerful sedatives from the hospital. These drugs, used rarely and under strict conditions for causing euphoria and hallucinations, led to his arrest after the theft was discovered. During the police interrogation, Grant admitted to taking the drugs, saying he used them on patients who were not adequately medicated in his view. Some suspected that he might have been using or selling the drugs, but there was no conclusive evidence to prove this. Grant was quickly suspended and then terminated from his job. The theft charges he faced were dropped, apparently because his parents stepped in to help. After losing his job, Grant, who was already somewhat of a recluse at 29, retreated even further into isolation. He spent most of his time inside, often on his computer, and his Internet activity was primarily focused on adult websites. Grant struggled with social interactions, especially with women, which left him feeling inadequate. To cope, he spent a lot of time chatting with webcam models on various websites, trying to fill the emptiness of his solitary life. Unfortunately, this habit was expensive, and Grant funded it by taking money from his parents and his older brothers. His dependency on adult content and alcohol became an addiction. Despite this, Grant seemed satisfied with this lifestyle, living off his family's resources and contributing nothing in return. On a platform for private online interactions, Grant met Sylvia Venceslava, or Sylvie, a stunning and charismatic woman from Bulgaria. Her confidence and charm drew him in. Sylvie made Grant feel loved, desired, and unique. He began to believe that they had a real connection and that her feelings for him were genuine. Convinced they were in a relationship, Grant was determined to stand out among her admirers. He spent hours and thousands of dollars each day to keep her attention solely on him and lavished her with gifts like expensive lingerie and jewelry, which she wore during their video chats. Eventually, his father had enough and gave him an ultimatum: find a job or leave home and lose financial support. Grant promised to look for work, but he didn't plan to follow through. Instead, he told his parents he wanted to become a video game streamer. His parents, hoping for any positive change, agreed to set up a streaming station for him. However, once he had his privacy, Grant returned to his usual activities, surfing adult-only sites. In August 2018, Cody, Grant's older brother, decided to take a break and travel to Japan for a new experience. He invited Grant and his best friend Jeremy to join him. Cody and Jeremy had saved their own money for the trip, but Grant's part was paid for by their parents. Instead of giving the money directly to Grant, they gave it to Cody, trusting him to handle it responsibly. During the trip, Grant seemed disinterested and detached. He paid little attention to the sights or tours, often glued to his smartphone. He frequently chose to stay in the hotel, using his brother's laptop instead of exploring with the others. One day, while the rest of the group visited a lake near Mount Fuji, Jeremy accidentally left his credit card in their hotel room. Taking advantage of the situation, Grant accessed Jeremy's account and stole thousands of dollars, which he spent on private sessions with his favorite webcam model, Sylvie. Jeremy noticed the theft later, but thought it was a case of fraud. He couldn't figure out who the thief was and continued to investigate after returning home, unaware that Grant was behind it. Desperate to impress Sylvie, Grant lost touch with reality. He made up stories about living alone in a large house, owning a successful business, and having plenty of money to spend on her. He backed these claims with substantial money transfers, ranging from a few $1,000s to as much as $100,000 for her birthday. Grant's extravagant spending eventually caught his parents' attention since he was using their accounts. Initially, he claimed the expenditures were investments in his online streaming project to gain followers, but his parents, Chad and Margaret, soon realized he was lying. A major family argument ensued, leading the family patriarch to demand that Grant leave home. However, his mother and Cody intervened, recognizing Grant's severe internet addiction. The family was shocked to discover that Grant had drained nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A search of his room revealed vials of potent substances, which Grant claimed he used to cope with his struggles. His parents decided to cut off his access to their funds and planned to send him to rehab for drug and internet addiction. Overwhelmed by everything, Grant declared he was done with it all and threatened to end his life. He then fled in his car at high speed. It was later found out that Grant went to his aunt and uncle's house, where he crashed through their fence and hit their garage wall. Understanding the family's distress, His relatives offered him refuge, giving him a place to stay until things calmed down. Grant quickly accepted the offer to stay with his relatives, but the next day he betrayed their kindness by stealing thousands of dollars from their accounts to fund more sessions with Sylvie. When his aunt discovered the theft and informed his parents, they urged her not to involve the police, promising to handle the situation and repay the stolen funds. That very day, Chad went to collect Grant, recognizing the urgent need for intervention. Chad, Margaret, and Cody knew that reasoning with Grant wouldn't work and feared he might commit more thefts if left to his own devices. They gave him a stern choice: either enter a rehab clinic to treat his addictions or face jail time for his thefts. Reluctantly, Grant agreed to the rehabilitation, and he was admitted to the clinic at the end of December 2018. While Grant was in treatment, his parents went through his computer and discovered the depth of his spending. They found Sylvie's profile, the woman who had captivated their son, and uncovered hundreds of videos and messages that Grant had saved, revisiting them frequently. The family contacted Sylvie to explain that Grant was not the successful businessman he had portrayed himself to be, but rather an unemployed man struggling with addictions, and that the money he had sent her was stolen. Sylvie was indifferent to the revelation, viewing her interactions with Grant as just a job, and she expressed no intention of returning the money. On January 5th, 2019, Grant unexpectedly returned home, having left the rehab clinic early due to non-compliance, completing less than a quarter of the program. He tearfully promised to change his life and seek employment, but he also threatened to end his life if forced to return to rehab. His parents decided to give him another chance, but set strict conditions: no computer use, a tight daily schedule, and close monitoring of any money he made. They even secured him a part-time job at a local grocery warehouse. For the first few weeks, Grant appeared to adhere to these new rules, leading his parents to hope that he had truly changed. However, on January 24, 2019, everything took a turn when Grant convinced his mother, Margaret, to let him use the laptop briefly to check his email and look for a better job. Trusting her son, Margaret agreed, not realizing the mistake she was making. Grant's first action was to try and contact Sylvie, only to find out that his parents had already revealed the truth about his circumstances to her. Grant viewed his parents' actions as a betrayal, feeling deeply humiliated in front of Sylvie, the only woman he believed he loved. He thought they deserved to pay for their actions. Chad kept most of the family's collection of firearms securely locked in a large safe and trusted no one with the key. However, Grant knew about another handgun kept loaded in his parents' bedroom. It was this weapon he chose to use. We warn you that we are about to show you graphic images of what happened next. His mother was working on the computer in the home office when Grant silently approached her from behind and fatally shot her in the back of the head. The way her body was positioned suggested she had no time to react or understand what was happening. Next, he waited for his father, Chad, who was just returning from work. As Chad walked into the kitchen, he was met by Grant and was shot twice in the chest without a chance to defend himself. With a chilling calm, Grant then concocted an even darker plan. He decided to frame his brother, Cody, who had always supported him and been his closest ally. Cody had since moved out to live with his girlfriend, but Grant lured him back home using his now deceased father's phone. He sent messages pleading with Cody to come home immediately, claiming something terrible had happened. His plan worked as expected. Cody, concerned, left work early and hurried home. As Cody entered the house and reached the bottom of the stairs, Grant shot him. Cody collapsed, mortally wounded but not immediately dead, realizing the grim reality of his situation but unable to alter it. After killing his family, Grant methodically removed his fingerprints from the gun, placed it in Cody's hand to transfer prints, and then left it beside Cody's body to stage the scene as a murder-suicide. Afterwards, Grant calmly packed his belongings, downloaded video files of his interactions with Sylvie, and even messaged her. Once ready, he loaded his car and drove away. On January 25, 2019, a worried man contacted the police in Seminole County, Florida. He was concerned because his friend and co-worker, Cody, a dedicated nurse, had not shown up for his hospital shift, which was completely out of character. Cody had left work slightly early the previous day, hurriedly departing due to urgent family matters, and he even forgot to pick up his paycheck. Cody had not been reachable by phone since then. His girlfriend, who he had recently started living with, mentioned that Cody had gone to his parents' house after a request from his father, but he hadn't come back or made contact. Alarmed by these unusual circumstances, the police were sent to the Amato family's address. The residence, situated in an Orlando suburb, featured a large property complete with a stable and area for walking horses. Cody's car was in the driveway, and lights were visible in various parts of the house, suggesting normalcy at first glance. There was no evidence of forced entry. The doors and windows were secure. When deputies arrived and knocked, there was no response, and calls to the house's landline were also unanswered. The police obtained permission to enter and managed to unlock the back door with a knife to slide the bolt. Inside, a haunting silence filled the house, yet the lit room suggested someone should be there. The scene they discovered was grim. Chad, the 59-year-old family patriarch, was found dead on the kitchen floor, having suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. Near the main entrance, Cody, age 31, was found curled up at the bottom of the staircase, also dead in a large pool of blood. In the home office, Margaret, 61, appeared as though she might be sleeping with her head on her arm by her computer, but the blood splatter on the monitor and the large stain under her head told a tragic story. Next to Cody's body, the police found a pistol, which forensic analysis later showed had Cody's fingerprints. Initially, it seemed like a horrifying family tragedy where Cody might have killed his parents and then himself, especially since there was no sign of a break-in or any missing items. However, a crucial clue pointed otherwise. Smeared blood on the front door indicated it had been locked from the outside by someone leaving the scene, suggesting that the real perpetrator was not among the deceased. The focus quickly shifted to the family's youngest son, 30-year-old Grant, who had been unaccounted for since the evening of the incident. His car, a white Honda, was missing, as were some personal belongings including a laptop from his room, indicating he had likely fled. Grant was immediately declared a person of interest and a search began to locate him. The following day, the police quickly tracked down Grant hiding in a small roadside motel in Orange County. He was arrested without showing surprise, though he appeared disappointed that he was found so quickly. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Grant vehemently denied all charges against him. During his interrogation at the police station, Grant concocted a series of unlikely stories about his father's severe mistreatment towards him, his mother, and his brother. He painted a picture of his father trying to sever his relationship with Sylvie, whom he described as his true and genuine love. When asked about the tragic night of January 24, 2019, Grant's explanations were unclear and inconsistent. He suggested that a violent altercation had erupted between his father and brother. According to Grant, Cody had seized a gun and fatally shot Chad, with their mother Margaret becoming an unintended casualty. Grant maintained that he was not present during the events, claiming he had spent the night in his car after being expelled from the house by his father. He claimed he drove away the next morning, oblivious to the calamity that had occurred. His account was fragmented and lacked credibility, and the evidence increasingly indicated that he was the lone architect of the tragedy.
Your DNA going to be found on his pants?
No,
You sure? It may be something, a question I'm asking I already know the answer to.
I know, but my DNA shouldn't be on his pants.
Shouldn't? Okay.
Consequently, Grant was arrested and charged as the principal suspect in the triple homicide of his family. Unable to post the $750,000 bond, Grant remained in jail as his trial began on July 15, 2019. The courtroom heard from numerous witnesses, all of whom spoke unfavorably about Grant. These included his elder brother Jason, other relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, whom Grant had previously robbed during their trip to Japan. Witnesses characterized Grant as someone deeply troubled by addictions, dishonesty, and theft. A critical piece of evidence highlighted during the trial was a substantial bank transfer from Chad's account to Grant, executed after all other family members had died. To authorize this transfer, it was revealed that Grant had used his deceased father's fingerprint. The prosecution advocated for the death penalty, arguing the severity and premeditation of Grant's crimes, while his defense pleaded that he was mentally ill and needed psychiatric treatment rather than capital punishment. On August 12, 2019, the verdict was delivered. Grant Amato, age 30, was found guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of 3 family members and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When asked if he felt remorse, Amato responded with, "My family has been blaming me for months for ruining their lives, stealing and not following the rules of the home, so I might as well be blamed for this too." Before these heartfelt scenes of family warmth and unity, a major ordeal unfolded for this young girl. One August afternoon in 2000, her world of childhood dreams was abruptly disrupted when she disappeared without a trace. What was supposed to be a joyous birthday celebration quickly turned into a dark nightmare. This is the tale of Mitzy Sanchez, a girl who endured a terrifying kidnapping and severe abuse, but would soon become known across the United States as the only child to escape and help capture her assailant, a notorious serial killer. Mitzy Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992 in Vallejo, California, USA. She grew up there with her parents, Susana and Juan Carlos, and her 3 older siblings. Susana worked as a hairstylist, while Juan Carlos earned his living as a carpenter. They were a working-class family living a peaceful life. Mitzy was described as a cheerful, sociable, and clever girl. By mid-2000, she was attending the same elementary school as her siblings, located about 6 blocks from their home. On the morning of August 10, 2000, Mitzy's family began preparations to celebrate her 8th birthday. Mitzy asked her mother if she could stay home from school that day to help with the decorations. However, Susana insisted that she go to school, promising that everything would be ready and more surprising when she returned. Excited about her special day, Mitzy left for school in the morning, looking forward to the love from her family and a wonderful birthday party awaiting her return. Susana spent the day preparing her birthday cake and decorating the house with colorful balloons and banners. It was expected that Mitzy would spend that afternoon celebrating with her loved ones and closest friends. However, nobody could have imagined that the celebration would turn into a horrific nightmare with a shocking outcome. Mitzy spent the day at school, eager to return home. Every day after school, she would meet her brothers and some friends to walk home together. But that afternoon, the routine changed. As soon as the school bell rang, Mitzy couldn't wait to run home and start the celebration. After all, it wasn't a long journey, and she knew the route well. Moreover, the path to her residence crossed one of the busiest streets in Vallejo. When she was just 2 blocks from her home, Mitzy noticed a car parked by the roadside. Inside, a man was watching her through the rearview mirror. Mitzy couldn't help but stare back. She later described the look he gave her as unsettling. As she approached the vehicle, an eerie feeling swept through her body, and when she made eye contact with the driver, she felt something wasn't right. Nonetheless, she decided to ignore her initial instinct and kept walking straight ahead without looking to the sides. The man continued to watch her, and as Mitzy got closer, he got out of the car. He approached her, stopped her, and asked if she could help him. The man explained that he had broken his hip in a biking accident and asked her to retrieve a strap that had fallen under the seat. Mitzy hesitated briefly, but being an innocent child, she agreed to help the stranger, unaware that her kindness toward an adult would lead her into a terrifying trap. As she approached the car door, Mitzy felt the stranger move behind her and push her into the vehicle. Trapped inside, she tried to scream and free herself, but he was evidently stronger. When Mitzy attempted to call for help, the man grabbed her from behind and covered her mouth with his hand to silence her. He forcefully subdued her, threw her to the car floor, and locked the door. Mitzy tried to escape, but the door handle would not open from the inside.
He threw me into the car, and, he said, if you try to get out or run, I'm gonna shoot you. I have a gun in my truck. I was freaked out. I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if it was real. I didn't know. I just, I was in shock.
The man got into the vehicle and drove off. Despite her screams, no one heard her. They drove a few blocks, and as they turned left, Mitzy could see her house pass by the window. It was then she realized what was happening and feared she might never see her family again. She wished with all her might to be at home and not in that car. The man drove to a hardware store parking lot and stopped. While there, he handed Mitzy new clothes and ordered her to change. The first thought that crossed Mitzy's mind was about who might have worn these clothes before. It was very disturbing for her to put on someone else's garments. Although confused and very scared, she complied with all the stranger's demands, not wanting to anger him. However, she always kept the idea of escaping in mind. Mitzy was a very clever girl. She thought she might find a blind spot to escape the car and return home. Meanwhile, at the Sanchez household, everything was ready for her party, but it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon and Mitzy had not returned from school. Her older sister began to worry and told her mother, who decided to call her teacher and some friends to find out where she might be. After receiving negative responses from everyone they contacted, Susanna panicked, realizing her daughter was missing. They called 911 to report Mitzy's disappearance and alerted their friends and neighbors, who soon joined the search. When the officers arrived, they knocked on every door in the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen the girl. However, there seemed to be no trace of her. By that time, Mitzy was far from that place. The man had parked in a public parking lot, and she could see there were restrooms there. She thought that if he allowed her to go there, she might be able to escape, but when she asked, he sharply replied no. The man intimidated her by saying he had a firearm stored in the trunk of the vehicle and warned her not to try to escape, claiming no one had ever escaped from him. He drove for a long time until nightfall, then decided to park in a rest area. He prepared to cover the windows with some blankets and towels so no one could see inside the car. Then he took a chain he had ready, wrapped it around Mitzy's ankle, attached it to the gear shift, and secured it with a padlock. After that, he left the vehicle and walked away. When he returned, he pulled out a bottle of liquor he had bought and forced Mitzy to drink directly from it. After making her drink, he showed her a series of photographs of various naked women. She didn't want to see them and shut her eyes to avoid looking. Then, he decided to take pictures of her as well, so he fetched his camera and started taking photos. That same night, the man fell asleep in the car, with Mitzy right beside him. Despite being extremely tired and sleepy, she fought hard to stay awake. She was terrified and didn't want to let her guard down for even a minute. At that moment, through a crack, she saw flashing blue and red lights. They were from a police patrol cruising the area. She thought that if she could scream or get out of the car, she might be saved. However, the threat made by the man echoed in her mind, making her believe that any attempt to escape could lead to her death. She watched the patrol pass very close and then saw it drive away. Her hopes were diminishing. She wondered if she might never escape and pondered whether her family was worried and looking for her. On August 11th, after 24 hours since her disappearance, the police department received a call from someone working at the local landfill who claimed to have found some clothes entangled in the trash. The officers who arrived at the scene collected the items for investigation. They turned out to be a sheet from a local motel. However, this clue did not provide any relevant leads for the case. That same day, elsewhere in the city, her captor drove around Vallejo again. He made her hide under the seat and covered her with a blanket to prevent anyone from seeing her. After a few minutes, the man stopped in front of a house and got out. Mitzy did not dare to look through the window, but she tried to force the chain tied to her leg, though it was impossible to break free. When he returned, he had some papers in his hand, started the car, and as they drove off, he told Mitzy that her mother was really worried about her. He claimed he had recently spoken to her and that she had given him a series of flyers with Mitzy's face and description to distribute around the area. Mitzy felt frustrated realizing that all this time they had been parked in front of her house and she had not noticed. She had been over 24 hours without food or water, felt very weak, and they had spent most of the day driving around the city and making quick stops. Then, they stopped in the parking lot of a deserted industrial factory. At this point, the man unlocked Mitzy from the chain and ordered her to move to the front seat while he was on the driver's side. It was then that he sexually assaulted her. The helpless child couldn't grasp what was happening, feeling her body overwhelmed by pain. In mere seconds, her life had become a real torment. Despite this, Mitzy held back her tears, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of seeing her in pain. As night fell, she resolved not to close her eyes, feeling an increasing fear of what he might do if she let her guard down. The next morning, on August 12th, they left the parking area and he started driving again. Unknown to Mitzy, the anguish growing inside her each minute she was trapped with this man was matched by the desperation her parents and relatives felt from not knowing her whereabouts. Mitzy had been observant of her captor's small habits, noting that he frequently stopped for cigarettes or alcohol. Whenever they parked, he would leave her alone and chained for at least 30 minutes. Upon his return, he would likely sexually abuse her again. However, this time, something was different. The man stopped the car to fetch his cigarettes, and as he had done each time they stopped, he left her locked and chained inside. Upon returning to the vehicle, he didn't get in. Instead, he opened the passenger side door and leaned towards her. But in doing so, something fell to the floor unnoticed by him. He then stood up and left the car again, warning her not to look and to remain silent. Mitzy ignored the warning, curious about what had fallen from his pocket. She got up and leaned towards the driver's seat to see what it was. Her heart filled with hope when she saw a bunch of keys on the floor, which had fallen from the man's pocket. Perhaps in a moment of inebriation, he had let his guard down and hadn't noticed what happened. For Mitzy, this was the small window of opportunity she had been desperately waiting for. One of the keys was smaller than the rest, so she assumed it was the key to her lock. Mitzy grabbed the keys and immediately tried the small key in the lock slot. She turned it, and the lock opened. Mitzy couldn't believe it. She was truly amazed. She removed the chain as quickly as she could, always alert in case the man returned before she could escape. Adrenaline surged through her body, and her survival instinct kicked in. Nothing would stop her now, and fear had become her ally, pushing her to get out as quickly as possible. As soon as she was free from the chain, she exited through an open window. As she placed her body on the ground, her legs failed her. She was very weak from lack of food and the physical abuse she had endured. However, this would not stop her. Mitzy began to stand and try to walk. She wouldn't give up. At that moment, her captor noticed her from afar and started yelling for her to come back to the car. But Mitzy, far from heeding, began to run for her life. Reaching the road, she started signaling to passing drivers at high speed. No one stopped. It seemed they didn't see her. Her legs wobbled under her, yet she struggled to control them and keep moving. She managed to keep going and cross the street while he chased her, shouting threats. She was terrified but wouldn't stop for anything. She knew that if she stopped or hesitated for even a moment, that monster would end her life. That's when she saw a truck coming down the highway towards her. Her captor was closing in. It was now or never. Mitzy decided to run onto the highway, hoping the truck would stop. She frantically signaled to the driver and the truck came to a halt in front of her. Seeing the window open, she didn't think twice. She jumped inside, landing on the man behind the wheel. She sat in the passenger seat and urgently pleaded with the driver to speed away, explaining that a man had abducted her and she had just escaped. The driver looked around but saw no one. They then sped past the car where she had been held captive. Mitzy pointed it out, so the man who saved her noted down the license plate. For the first time in 2 days, Mitzy felt safe. Around 11 in the morning, the police department received an unexpected call. A truck driver reported that a young girl had jumped into his truck, very scared, and claimed to be escaping from a criminal. When the police asked him the girl's name, he said she claimed to be Mitzy Sanchez. In his interview, the driver recounted how the girl appeared out of nowhere, desperately seeking his help. He stated that she was truly frightened and got into his vehicle with the fear that her captor might arrive at any moment and kill her. The police immediately contacted the Sanchez family, and the driver took the girl to the authorities, who informed her that her family had been extremely worried about her, had never lost hope of finding her, and loved her immensely. Her parents were on their way to the police station to reunite with her. When Susana and Juan Carlos arrived, Mitzy ran into her mother's arms, tears streaming down her face. It felt as though they had just woken from a terrible nightmare. The little girl had missed them dearly, and the scene was overwhelmingly emotional. She was the child who had survived the worst of crimes. Mitzy arrived home in her father's arms, where she was greeted by a crowd of people, including neighbors, friends, and relatives. However, she appeared overwhelmed and still scared, seemingly reluctant to receive so much attention. Everyone inside and outside the house joined in singing the Happy Birthday song that they hadn't been able to celebrate on August 10th. Mitzy was deeply moved and couldn't stop crying in front of the cameras and the crowd surrounding her. Despite the good intentions behind this gesture, it seemed that no one fully grasped the terrifying ordeal she had endured over the 2 days she was away from her loved ones. However, they would soon learn the true story as narrated by her. The police easily traced the suspect's name through the car plate number provided by the truck driver who picked up Mitzy. When they showed the girl a photo of the suspect, she immediately recognized him. They were looking for a man named Curtis Dean Anderson, a 39-year-old taxi driver. Quickly, Mitzy's abduction was linked to other cases involving two 8-year-old girls who had disappeared months earlier. One was Johanna Fairchild, who had vanished on the same street as Mitzy. The other girl was named Amber Swartz. Curtis was arrested 10 hours after Mitzy was found, and in April 2001 his trial began. Unsurprisingly, Mitzy was the prosecution's key witness. The little girl was called to the stand to recount what had happened from the moment she was walking home and was forced by the accused into his vehicle. Later, Mitzy would remember entering the courtroom and seeing Curtis seated there. Despite being terrified, she knew she had to testify to ensure he remained in jail and could not harm anyone else. The brave young girl sat with a teddy bear in front of the judge, lawyers, and her family, and recounted in vivid detail the nightmare she had survived. Everyone in the courtroom was horrified by what had happened to such a young child. It seemed like something out of a horror movie. Following her testimony, Curtis was found guilty and sentenced to 251 years in prison. At just 8 years old, not only did Mitzy manage to outsmart her captor and escape with her life, but her testimony also helped put her assailant behind bars. Furthermore, her story brought to light the grim pattern of Curtis, who apparently had many victims before the crime for which he was tried and convicted. All were girls Mitzy's age, with her being the only survivor. Once in prison, Curtis confessed to being responsible for 13 additional cases, including the crimes against Johanna Fairchild and Amber Swartz. He admitted to kidnapping, abusing, and killing all those little girls. Still, he refused to provide details unless he could secure a deal with the police, as he feared for his life in prison. Back at the Sanchez home, the family tried to return to normalcy. However, they began experiencing financial difficulties due to the emotional trauma left by their daughter's abduction. Mitzy's parents were unable to sleep well and were constantly nervous. This began to affect their jobs, and paying bills became challenging. They started receiving support from a local organization, which provided them with food, helped with expenses, and offered psychological assistance, particularly for Mitzy, who seemed to be starting a post-traumatic process that her family struggled to understand. Despite trying to continue their lives as usual, the horrific experience left deep scars on Mitzy, who felt consumed by anger. This was compounded by the bullying she faced at school. Her classmates called her the kidnapped girl and mocked her, claiming she enjoyed the attention she received from the media. Sometimes, the children were truly cruel to her, even saying that she should have died during her kidnapping. She attended therapy for 4 years, but recovery was not easy. Mitzy's family encouraged her to join support groups for finding missing children, which she found fulfilling and useful. However, each time a missing child was found deceased, she became deeply depressed. As time went on, the lasting effects of her abduction at just 8 years old became apparent. Mitzy evolved into a rebellious teenager, heavily consuming alcohol to alleviate her pain and distract herself from her past. But life was about to test her once again, and this time she would need to save herself. On May 1st, 2009, at the age of 16, after drinking at a party with friends, Mitzy was involved in a severe car accident. She was thrown through the windshield during the impact, breaking her nose, neck, and an arm. The crash was so severe that she was hospitalized for 2 weeks, during which she was in a coma. Upon awakening, the doctors informed her that she was pregnant. At that moment, she decided to make a complete turnaround in her life. She began to take better care of herself, stopped drinking, reconnected with her faith, and devoted herself to her pregnancy and later, to motherhood. Mitzy started working at a foundation called Klaas Kids, founded by Mark Klaas after the abduction of his own daughter in 1993. Inspired by this project, she decided to establish her own program focusing on child safety awareness. In 2018, she created a foundation bearing her name. Her remarkable ability to free herself after 2 days of captivity and the dramatic challenges she faced in turning her personal trauma into an opportunity to help and educate others have earned her numerous accolades. On May 23, 2001, less than a year after her ordeal, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children awarded her a medal, making her the first recipient of the organization's Courage Award. As an adult in 2019, Mitzy Sanchez was named Woman of the Year by California's 14th Assembly District in a ceremony held at the state capitol. By 2024, Mitzy is a 32-year-old woman, an outstanding mother, and a tireless activist working at her foundation to assist children who are victims of sexual abuse or are missing. Additionally, she gives lectures and workshops on safety and prevention to equip young people with better tools for self-defense. In the early hours of July 16, 2010, in the usually quiet town of Pico Truncado, a shocking event occurred. The body of Johanna Casas, a 20-year-old model and former beauty queen of the town, was found in a deserted area. She had been killed by 2 gunshot wounds. The prime suspects in the murder were Marcos Diaz, her partner until the day of the murder, and Victor Chingolani, her ex-boyfriend. But the story would soon take an even darker turn. Johanna Casas was born in Pico Truncado, a small town in the northern part of Santa Cruz province in Argentina. The town got its name from a nearby hill with a flat top. From there, you can see the oil wells, which are the main industry in the area. Though her exact birth date isn't officially recorded, family social media posts and news reports suggest she was born on July 19, 1990. Johanna wasn't the only baby to arrive that day. 15 minutes after she was born, her twin sister Edith was born. They are the oldest daughters of Marcelina del Carmen Orellana and Valentin Casas, who also had another child. Valentin, a police officer, eventually split from Marcelina, but he stayed very involved in his kids' lives. The twins looked incredibly alike. They had the same face, build, and even sounded similar. They even shared part of their names, as their parents named the younger twin Edith Johanna. They were so similar that their mom would sometimes mix them up, even changing the same baby's diaper twice. The sisters shared a special twin bond. Edith once said that they could feel when something was happening to the other. For instance, when Edith was 11, she had an accident while with her mom in another city nearby. She was in a coma for a few days, and when she woke up, she kept asking for Johanna. Valentin told her that Johanna, who was with him back in their hometown, felt like Edith was calling her. As they grew up, the twins became beautiful young women with very different personalities. Edith was quieter and more reserved, while Johanna was outgoing and liked fashion and makeup. This interest in fashion led Johanna to start a modeling career. She even participated in fashion shows and traveled to bigger cities like Bahia Blanca, where she was once crowned the beauty queen of Pico Truncado. In mid-2006, when Johanna was just 15, she met a local young man named Victor Chingolani, who was 21 at the time. They met one afternoon at the town bingo hall, where Johanna was with her dad and brother. Victor was at another table with his mom and a friend. Later, he mentioned noticing Johanna looking his way quite a bit. Victor had a reputation around town for being quite the charmer and a ladies' man. He worked long hours at the oil company and spent his free time out with friends, often choosing local brothels over bars. He boasted about being with over 40 women who came to him effortlessly. That day at the bingo, after they exchanged looks, Victor felt sure he could start something with her. He said that Johanna made the first move by coming over and giving him a note with her name and phone number on it. He texted her right away and they started talking. They went out a few times and soon made their relationship official. Marcelina, despite the age difference between Johanna and Victor, was okay with their relationship. She preferred this to her daughter randomly hanging out with others. They were together for about a year and a half. Over time, Johanna's parents noticed Victor's aggressive behavior toward her. There was an incident where Victor, trying to hit Johanna, accidentally broke a window and injured his hand instead. Things got even more complicated when Victor and Johanna broke up, and he started seeing Edith. Victor said his feelings for her grew over time, and he was never romantically involved with both sisters simultaneously. While he was with Johanna, Edith was dating another guy, and sometimes the four of them went out together. There were also times when Victor asked Johanna out, and Edith joined because she was home alone. Victor was drawn to Edith's quieter, more reserved nature. She was just as lovely as her sister, but simpler. Even after his relationship with Johanna ended, he kept in touch with Edith. Eventually, they admitted their feelings for each other, but Edith wanted to talk to Johanna about it first. Johanna told her sister they were adults and knew what they were doing, so she didn't oppose their relationship. However, the twins' close bond changed. When Edith started dating Victor, the friends they shared began to drift apart and each sister formed her own group. Victor and Edith eventually broke up, and Victor moved on to another local woman. Both sisters continued to have complicated relationships after Victor. When Victor ended another relationship 2 years later, he reached out to Johanna again. She was with someone else at the time, but quickly ended that relationship to get back with Victor. This reunion was brief, ending after 2 months because Johanna wanted children, which Victor did not. Afterward, Johanna started seeing a man named Marcos Diaz, who was disliked by her parents. The Diaz family was surrounded by rumors, including a serious allegation that one of Marcos's brothers had killed his own child. Marcos had a violent reputation and was possessive and controlling. He was overly jealous, constantly messaging Johanna and not allowing her to go out alone. Despite these red flags, they moved in together after just 6 months of dating. During this period, Victor rekindled his relationship with Edith, admitting he had never gotten over their breakup. This back and forth between the sisters would culminate in a series of dramatic, tragic, and scandalous events. On July 15, 2010, 4 days before their 19th birthday, Johanna went out partying with Marcos until about 3 in the morning. She was last seen alive as they left the party venue together. Early the next morning, a local dog walker discovered Johanna's lifeless body in an open field about 3 miles from the town center. The area, known as the forest belt of Pico Truncado, soon became the focus of intense police activity as news spread that one of the Casas twins had died. The autopsy later revealed that Johanna had been shot at close range in the heart and between the second and third ribs. Within hours of the discovery, police arrested Victor and Marcos as the main suspects in the crime, given their relationships with the victim. Investigators suspected that the murder was a planned act by both men, theorizing that Johanna wanted to end her relationship with Marcos, and the men decided that if she would not be with them, then she would not be with anyone. Marcos was released a week later due to a lack of evidence, despite having been the last person seen with Johanna the night before. Shortly after, authorities found DNA on a cigarette butt at the scene where Johanna was killed. Unfortunately, by that time, Marcos had fled and it would be over 6 months before he was captured and subsequently placed in pre-trial detention. Meanwhile, Victor remained in custody, charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend. However, he consistently maintained his innocence. According to his statements on the morning of July 16th, he had been at the casino and then at a friend's house until 6 a.m. Surprisingly, his arrest and subsequent charges did not completely sever his relationship with Edith. Victor later recounted that on his first night in prison, he asked for a phone to call Edith and tell her he had nothing to do with her sister's death. He also wanted to express his longing to see her again. However, Edith hung up as soon as she recognized his voice, then changed her number, and he was unable to contact her again. Victor, trying to see Edith again, asked to be taken to the hospital, claiming he had a headache. On the way, he saw Edith walking hand in hand with another man, suggesting their intense relationship had ended. Edith later shared that she was going through a tough time. She was mourning her twin, the closest person to her, and dealing with her own inner turmoil. She felt ignored and over-medicated. 2 years after Johanna's death, in mid-2012, Victor stood trial for her murder, facing charges that painted him as abusive and controlling. The prosecution's case was built on 3 main pieces of evidence. The first was the paraffin test, done on Victor's hands right after his arrest, which detected gunpowder. The second was evidence from tracking dogs that placed him at the crime scene. Lastly, Victor's alibi failed as he couldn't confirm his whereabouts during the crime. Victor's lawyer pushed back, asking the higher court to throw out the evidence due to severe investigative errors, including a supposed audio recording of the judge of the case acknowledging mistakes by the inexperienced local police. Despite these challenges, the trial began on June 18, 2012. The prosecutor sought a 20-year sentence due to the alleged use of a firearm, while another suggested 15 years, and Victor's defense argued for his complete acquittal. Victor decided not to testify. The courtroom heard from various witnesses. Johanna's father accused Victor of past violent behaviors and threats towards his daughter, recounting a time he overheard Victor on a speakerphone call threatening Johanna. A woman who lived near the crime scene mentioned her son was the only one home that night and noted the delayed police response. The person who found Johanna testified that he saw no blood at the scene. Another witness spoke about Victor's complicated relationships with the twins, suggesting he saw Edith as a substitute for Johanna. Edith herself took the stand, having attended every day of the trial wearing a t-shirt demanding justice for her sister. She testified that Victor was physically abusive towards both her and Johanna and claimed that he had coerced them into intimate relations. Finally, she stated that she believed Victor had played a role in Johanna's death, calling him a psychopath. The hearings concluded, and on June 27, 2012, Victor was sentenced to 13 years in prison for simple homicide. However, the controversy surrounding the case was far from over. Despite his conviction for Johanna's murder and the serious allegations against him, Edith later shocked everyone by announcing that she was back in a relationship with Victor. It remained unclear how this reconciled relationship came about, but at some point, Edith became convinced of Victor's innocence and believed that the real perpetrator of the crime against her twin sister was Marcos, who was in pre-trial detention awaiting his trial. When asked about her sworn testimony, Edith claimed she had been pressured by her parents to make those accusations. Regarding the evidence presented by the prosecution, Edith sided with the defense. Just as Victor's lawyer had argued during the trial, there was never any conclusive evidence placing Victor at the crime scene. He also highlighted issues with the paraffin test, noting that it was conducted without expert witnesses present, and the officer in charge didn't wear gloves and used his teeth to cut the tape. Furthermore, Victor was found to have the highest concentration of gunpowder on his right hand. He explained this by saying he had been in his brother-in-law's truck, who often went hunting and sometimes left bullets on the seats. Regarding the tracking dogs, the defense stated that 2 of them had yielded negative results, with only 1 dog indicating a positive result, and there were no witnesses to corroborate this. They also argued that a person's scent could linger at a scene for up to a month. Victor claimed the entire trial was rigged, suggesting that in Santa Cruz, anyone could be convicted just to satisfy the victim's family's demands. While in prison, Victor took up carpentry, stating that Johanna's death had transformed him, leading him to abandon his partying and drinking habits. Meanwhile, Edith had moved in with Claudia, Victor's sister, possibly due to estrangement from her own family when she decided to reconcile with the man convicted of her twins' murder. Together, they sold chairs, stools, tables, magazine racks, portraits, and paintings that Victor made in prison. With the proceeds, he bought a pair of rings. During a prison visit, Victor proposed to Edith, and she accepted. As expected, Edith's engagement to the man imprisoned for killing her sister was devastating news for the twins' parents, who could not comprehend what was happening. For them, Victor had murdered one daughter and was destroying the other. At that point, Marcelina declared that it was as if Edith had also died. Since moving in with her sister-in-law, Edith had barely seen her family. She believed they had brainwashed her daughter and that Claudia never left her alone for a second. When the engagement was announced, Edith's family filed a legal injunction to try to prevent the marriage, claiming that the 23-year-old was mentally unstable and fearing for her safety. The wedding was originally scheduled for December 5, 2012, when Victor had only served about 6 months of his sentence. However, the injunction delayed the ceremony. Despite this, Edith showed no signs of psychological or mental dysfunction that would prevent her from getting married. On February 14, 2013, Victor and Edith tied the knot amid widespread disapproval. Their story, a woman marrying the man accused of murdering her twin sister, grabbed headlines worldwide. An Argentine journalist known for his bold reporting style won the exclusive coverage with a bid of $1,500. Journalists from countries like Germany and the USA flocked to their small town, and big media outlets like the BBC and Daily Mail covered the story. Edith even got offers from Playboy magazine and was invited to join Argentina's top TV show, Dancing for a Dream, but she turned them all down. On their wedding day, just before noon, the couple headed to the civil registry office in Pico Truncado, heavily guarded due to the controversy. Chaos broke out when Victor, still incarcerated, arrived in a prison transport. The crowd became unruly, throwing punches, stones, eggs, and tomatoes, and shouting insults. The vehicle and the registry's doors were damaged, making the wedding front-page news. Despite the chaos, Edith and Victor declared their love and plans to start a family. Yet, the legal battle over Johanna Casas' murder was far from over. On June 4, 2013, the trial began for Marcos Diaz, who had been held at the Pico Truncado police station. Charged initially as an accessory, Marcos was described in court documents as violent and controlling, known for harassing his girlfriends and often involved in armed fights. His unexplained trip the day after Johanna's murder was seen as an escape attempt, and he stopped texting Johanna right after her supposed time of death, suggesting he knew she was gone. This contrasted sharply with his frequent texts to her the day before. DNA from a cigarette butt and a music CD linked to Marcos found near Johanna's body were key pieces of evidence against him. During the trial, Edith, supporting Victor, tearfully accused Marcos of killing her sister. Valentin, the twins' father, also testified, recalling the last time he saw Johanna with Marcos and describing Marcos as a dangerous man involved in cult-like activities, often seen causing trouble at the cemetery. Marcelina, for her part, described the accused as obsessive over her daughter. He never let her be alone, not even to attend family parties. However, the proceedings took an unexpected turn when prosecutor expanded the accusations. He posited that Marcos was the actual perpetrator of Johanna's murder and the only one present at the scene when her life was taken. As a result, on July 2, 2013, the court sentenced Marcos Diaz to 12 years in prison for the homicide of Johanna. At this point, 2 individuals were convicted for the same crime, each found guilty by different courts. Following the verdict, Marcos expressed dissatisfaction with the sentence, reasserted his innocence, and claimed he was convicted because there was no one else to investigate. On the other hand, Edith expressed relief and happiness that justice had finally been served. Meanwhile, the twins' mother chose not to speak to the media, while their father expressed his disagreement with the ruling. Victor's lawyer announced plans to seek his immediate release, asserting that they had always maintained his innocence. If the evidence indeed confirmed that Marcos was the only one at the crime scene, his client would be released immediately. Ultimately, on December 5, 2013, the Higher Court of Justice announced the release of Victor due to insufficient evidence to convict him. After his release, Victor sought compensation from the state, requesting $75,000 for his wrongful imprisonment. However, he received no payment. Over time, Marcelina began to reassess her view of the events and ultimately accepted that Victor had not been involved in Johanna's murder. Although the marriage between Edith and Victor lasted several years, by 2021, it was known that they had separated. She was living with a new partner and was expecting her first child, while he had rebuilt his life with another woman. After more than 2 decades of tangled romantic relationships, a brutal crime, and a couple of equally controversial trials, the case of Johanna Casas seemed to have finally reached a conclusion. Nevertheless, to this day, there are still those who debate the facts and continue to question whether Victor was truly innocent of the events of July 16, 2010, or if he managed to escape unpunished from one of Argentina's most sensational crimes.